You what? I'm sorry that I went live a couple minutes late. It's been a little bit of a day. Couldn't even find my hat. I had to go for a nice scarf. That's all right. Because on Socialism Saturday, doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter if you're wearing makeup. The socialists never wear makeup on Socialism Saturday. Welcome to the most dystopian stream you will watch all week long. On Socialism Saturday, we watch real socialism. Not CNN socialism, not AOC, not Bernie Sanders. We watch the real effing deal. The farthest left of the far left, and we talk about it and we translate it. And as Trendlin says, there are a couple rules for Socialism Saturday. Number one, socialists suck at technology. If there's something going on with the audio or they can't get their Zoom to work, I swear to you, it is not my fault. This is like every single socialism stream we watch, these people have no idea how to use technology. They almost always screw up the audio at some point. I apologize in advance. Number two, these people speak a completely different language. Completely different language. They might be technically speaking English, but if you don't understand what they're saying, just sit with it a minute, ask questions. We will try to help you. We will try to translate, and we will help each other get through this. Scott, I'm glad you're here because I am looking for someone roundabout the Burlington area in Vermont. Please get in touch with me. I have an assignment for you, Scott. I need boots on the ground in Burlington, Vermont. That has nothing to do with Socialism Saturday. It has to do with something else. But well, it kind of has to do with socialism. Vermont is basically taken over by the socialists. But we'll talk about that another time because I've got a great stream tonight. I'm actually really excited about this. This is from our old friends at Is that the right window? Yes, it is. Our old friends at Haymarket Books. Let me just make that a little bit bigger so you can actually see the title of the thing. This is called Towards a Queer Marxism, a roundtable discussion. Queer Marxism is some of the most dystopian shit you will ever see in your life. And this was streamed like 3 days ago. It is extremely recent, 2 days ago. So that's what we're going to be watching tonight. Let's see if it has a description. This roundtable brings together different voices in the articulation of queer Marxism in a discussion of its past, present, and future. Queer Marxism emerged in the early 21st century, built upon a century of Marxist attempts to grapple with the issues of sex and sexuality, and as a corrective to the sometimes valid concerns of lesbians, sometimes valid, gay and sexual politics activists, that Marxists saw sexuality as a peripheral concern or space to impose class politics as the primary form of radicalism. They got a whole bunch of stuff going on. We got some stuff in the chat. Peter Drucker. God, I instantly think, whenever I hear Peter Drucker, I instantly think of the management guy because that's just my background. God, I hope it. No, I think Peter Drucker's dead. So I think it is probably a different Peter Drucker. Anyway, that's what we will be watching tonight. Well, Scott, if you can direct me to anyone in the greater Burlington area, I really need someone in Burlington. Okay, here's what's happening. Do you guys know, this is a side note. So do you guys remember Burlington, the Burlington School District, the ones that did all those crazy webinars where they were grooming the kids on the internet? Well, Burlington has now moved its crazy Burlington training to an in-person only option. I am not above driving my ass up to Burlington to go see what they're doing. I'm not above it, but it takes like 4 hours. I don't really want to. If I can recruit someone in the greater Burlington area to go to these trainings and report back, I will even provide you with camera equipment. I'm not messing around. That is a different topic for a different day. I'm putting this idea out into the universe. It's not immediate. These trainings aren't until next year, but I'd really like someone to go because I think they're going to be nuts. Anyway, oh, you'll go with me? Oh, we can do a road trip. It'll be fun. If they catch one of us, the other one will get in. They might recognize me too, which is obviously part of the problem, but you can go incognito. Anyway, So today we're going to be watching this queer Marxism roundtable discussion. Mount that like button for me if you're excited about that. And before we dig in, I just want to let you guys know that there are several ways you can support the work I'm doing. I'm really I've been spending all weekend trying to get some websites online. I actually just launched a website for my school's Exposed project I'm really excited about. We're going to be doing a lot more of that in the new year. But if you want to support the work I'm doing and keep me doing these streams on Saturday and pretty much every other day of the week, you can head over to activelyunwoke.com/support. You can sign up for Patreon. You can sign up for Locals. You can get a subscription on one of my Substacks. The reason I bring this up is that if you join either on my YouTube channel as a channel member, or you join my Patreon or my Locals, you're going to get access to my supporter Discord. And guess what we're doing tomorrow night in my supporter Discord? My community is making me watch Die Hard. I've never seen Die Hard. I refused for the longest time. I didn't want to do it, but my community finally put their foot down and they said, you have to fucking watch Die Hard, Carlin. It's a Christmas movie. I said, I don't think it's a Christmas movie. And they assured me that it is. So we will be watching Die Hard tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern time in my supporter Discord. And you can get access to that by either becoming a channel member on my YouTube channel or by joining my Patreon or by joining my Locals. And the information is in the description below if you want to go ahead and do that. All right. We're not going to do a whole lot of shilling today, but I do have a beer. My husband went to the beer store for me. So these are his choices, but I have to show you guys the beer he picked out. He was like, Carlin, I had to get this for you because it's got first of all, it's red for Socialism Saturday. It's got a dog on the can, and it's called Hugs and Belly Rubs. And that is the name of the beer. This is from Two Share Brewing Company, and it apparently is a stout made with cold brew and coffee roasters. And it's 7.1%, which means my husband's trying to get me drunk, but that's all right. We're going to pour this here beer and we're going to see how it is. If you guys are drinking something, I recommend something hard for Socialism Saturday, if I'm honest. If you're sober, I respect your choices. But socialism goes down a lot easier with alcohol, is all I'm saying. All right, let's see. Oh, you can already see that coffee, can't you? Look at the head on that. Oh my God, there's more head than beer. That is boozy. That is boozy, 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 boozy beer. All right, we gotta let that settle a little bit. My husband's definitely trying to get me drunk. Oh, shit. That has a lot of alcohol in it. All right, that might be good or bad. We're gonna see how this goes. Let's get this here set up. This is 2 hours, guys, so hunker down. We're gonna be here a minute. I hope you all learn to like each other for Socialism Saturday. And again, if you don't understand them, that's perfectly normal. We'll help translate. I will do my best to help translate. If you have thoughts in the chat about what they're saying or what points they're trying to get across, I can't come up with all the good ideas, guys. We have to do this together. So if you have thoughts in the chat, I will be watching it, and I'll display them on the screen. If you guys have some good ideas, I'm sure you will, and we will help each other to understand what's going on. Oh, Nick, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad things are okay. All right, let's get this party started, guys. Queer Marxism.
And broadcasts, the last one of this year, and before the Christian and commodified appropriation of a pagan festival, fetishizing an old man gaining entry into your house.
Oh, they're already
your children
shitting
presents.
on Christmas.
My name is Paul Reynolds. I'm a
Wouldn't
member
be true
of the
socialists if they
Historical
didn't shit on
Materialism
Christmas.
Editorial Board. I am joined by 3 stellar speakers for this final discussion, a discussion around queer Marxism. I will let them introduce themselves, starting with Holly.
Hi, I'm Holly Lewis, author of The Politics of Everybody, and I'll just leave it at that.
Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Drucker, originally from the United States, but I've lived for 30 years now in the Netherlands, where I'm a fellow of the International Institute for Research and Education in Amsterdam, and I've written
Thank you for the reminder about captions.
Gay Normality and Queer Anti-Capitalism, which is coming out soon in Castilian, Spanish, with a new introduction, with thoughts I hope to share with everybody today.
And Alan.
Oh man, that sounds
Hi,
good,
my
Sin.
name's Alan Sears. I'm a longtime socialist and queer
Not that Peter
activist in
Drucker. I
Canada,
said
and
the
I
same
teach
thing.
sociology,
Not that one.
and I have written about queer Marxism for a fairly long period, at first trying to work out issues that were underexplored in the political tendencies that I was active in, and then over time wearing my scholarly hat in that as well. And I'm currently working on a book on queer Marxism and Marx's ideas of alienation.
Okay, the session is called Towards a Queer Marxism Roundtable Discussion. And the way we're going to structure it is Holly will kick us off with some thoughts and remarks. Then
Make it full
Peter will
screen.
take up the discussion, and then Alan. And then we'll slowly seek into a more discursive approach. And of course, hopefully we'll gain comments, criticisms, statements through the YouTube chat for you who are listening to it. So let's start up then, I think, with Holly.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Oh yes, Marxism is always anti-capitalism.
All right. So
Again, just to be really clear, guys, these are the real deal. These are people who want to abolish capitalism. These are people who want to abolish private property. These are people who will probably talk tonight about abolishing the gender binary entirely. That means they want to abolish both men and women. These people basically want anytime you hear the word revolution, that means they want to destroy capitalism and replace it with Marxism. Anytime you hear them say the words abolition or liberation, as in gender abolition or gender liberation, that might mean that they want to quite literally abolish the idea of gender, liberate themselves from the gender binary. Remember, the 4 primary goals of the woke left, and I wrote an article on my Substack, carlin.substack.com, karlyn.substack.com, about this. It's pinned right to the top. The 4 goals of the woke left, and these are the wokest of the woke. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. When they're talking about abolishing, liberating, they're talking about destabilizing the system, dismantling the system. They're doing that so they can attack capitalism because they're going to blame capitalism for all of the problems in the world. They're trying to turn the culture against capitalism, against private property, against anything that leaves you less than beholden to the state, so that they can usher in Marxism. That is the whole point.
In my talk today, I'm going to situate some of the themes of my book, The Politics of Everybody, which was written in the late 2014, early 2015, and came out in 2016, and which had a new second printing with a new preface last year. The driving metaphor of the book is that capitalism shapes the terrain that we're required to traverse as we develop as people, and that it is the matrix of current possible paths that we can take. Shifts in its terrain influences where we're directed to go, where we can fight to be, and sometimes where we find ourselves stuck. So in short, how we survive and thrive or not. As the conditions grounding all social relations and shaping all material exchanges, capitalism is the precondition under which we build social relationships. And because this is obviously the case, I
just want to pause there. Capitalism is the precondition on which we build all social relationships. Who knows what I'm going to say next? And I'm going to say it came from the Communist Manifesto. Who knows what I'm going to say next? Capitalism is the presupposition on which all social relationships are built, to include, I know you guys know this, I've been hammering on this for months. This is a pop quiz for my regular viewers. If capitalism is the underlying factor of all social relationships, what does that include? They want to get rid of the family. Yes. They want to destroy all social relationships. All of them. Good job, guys.
As we develop as people, and that it is the matrix of current possible paths that we can take. Shifts in its terrain influences where we're directed to go, where we can fight to be, and sometimes where we find ourselves stuck. So in short, how we survive and thrive or not. As the conditions grounding all social relations and shaping all material exchanges, capitalism is the precondition under which we build social relationships. And because this is obviously the case, the queerness of bodies and sexual relationships can't be some matter external to or irrelevant to Marxist analysis. So in a nutshell, unpacking who we are and what we do with our bodies.
You can't be queer and be a capitalist, is what she just said.
What and how capitalism organizes our bodies to meet different productive and social reproductive needs. As those needs shift, the requirements shift, and sometimes the expectations even become competing or contradictory. So for example, like when we're expected to work and parent or take care of other people in our family simultaneously.
Those would be children.
To do social reproductive work. Or when the companies we work for,
or the elderly, quite frankly,
diversity to a workplace, but only when it isn't disruptive. And then those of us who are supposedly tagged as diverse have to do all this extra work. So those would be kind of contradictions.
Hang on. I'm gonna, Sean, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit, but not really. This is not your fault. I don't mean any offense by this. How capitalism organizes our bodies, we are in the realm of science fiction. No, we're not. This is playing out in our culture right now. These people are winning. Do you know how I know they're winning? Because there are drag shows everywhere. People are crying about drag queens. People are crying about children in drag queens. Conservatives are all up in arms trying to get books about gay people taken out of libraries. And you're going to say, but those are pornography. Okay, fine. But do you know who put them in the libraries in the first place? These people. This is directly playing out in our culture right now. This is not science fiction. What this person is saying is playing out every single day on Fox News. And I really want people to understand that. These people are winning. They are kicking our asses. Big time. Not by a little bit, by a mile. Just be very careful about dismissing these people because it's not going to be to our benefit.
We navigate changes, we're forced to pivot, and these pivots go into forming who we are. In the book, I'm not arguing this in some determinist sense, but in the sense that we are living, reacting, and interacting beings. Because capitalism is our current life world, the selves that we build can only be from the genders and sexual possibilities.
Hang on. Uranium Penetrator says, don't worry, the state will raise your children for you. No. Not even. These people don't want you to have biological children. You guys know all those birthing pods? You guys seen this? Conservatives are pushing this big time. We talked about this in Happy Hour yesterday. You guys see those pods that can gestate babies? They don't want you having biological children. The state will grow all the children and then distribute them to the most worthy of socialists. That's real.
Of a capitalist life world. So I guess that you could say that I'm a gender and sexuality realist, in that my argument is that until we abolish capitalism, we get neither gender liberation nor sexual liberation. And while we should always, of course, fight for ourselves and our wants and our needs, and we should live as fully and truthfully as possible in the here and now, the fact is that socialist or communist gender and communist sexuality can't emerge under capitalism. And I don't find this depressing in the least, by the way. It means
people in the chat are asking where are they going to get the sperm and the egg to grow the children. If the only way you can get assigned a child is that you donate your sperm and your egg, then you're going to donate your sperm and egg. That's the only, how else would they get it? They're going to get people to donate it. And in return, they're going to say, we will deliver you a child. Now, it's not going to be your child. It's not going to be your biological child, but they'll say, you know what? A report to the artificial insemination center, whatever, the surrogacy center, make your donation, and that is your key onto the list of families that potentially get a child. That's the only way you're going to get a kid, is by donating what we need to grow the kids. But you're not going to get your biological kid. You're going to get the one we give you. That would be my guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm making that up. Or people would pay for it. Yeah, or people would pay. Or they would be given away to like the elite of society.
That future generations could have something that we will never know. And so I tip my hat to them. As revolutionaries, we're always fighting for the future of future people that we cannot know, and that is part of our sociality. We extend ourselves into a past and towards a future. But this implies that queer people will not end capitalism itself solely by becoming more purely or radically queer in their own personal lives. Queer people will end capitalism by becoming part of an international movement to end capitalism, but we will be part of that movement as ourselves with our own demands and without apology. In my book, Following Lukács and Following Calvin Floyd, I take up the question of totality. I argue that we are under one global economic system called capitalism, and that the gender oppression experienced by women, intersex, and trans people is a product of capitalism, the unitary model as it's called. But that said, there is a gap between the economic rationality that organizes life and our experience of the world. As individuals, we don't experience the world as a world in its totality. We experience our paths through the world. And for that reason, the world appears to us as uneven and discontinuous, as places we belong and places we don't belong. And this gets to the more contemporary piece. Since COVID, I think that more than ever, we're experiencing the world along isolated paths, but also seeing in news media a totality that presents the world as a remote object, one that we can take a position on, but one that we can't necessarily connect with. So this idea, and that's not since COVID, that's just, more of our condition. So this idea of a capitalist totality needs to be understood as distinct from a mediated sense of global presence given by news networks, where we're very much positioned as silenced witnesses. In my book, I discuss this as the problem of awareness campaigns, but I think that the situation has become much more dire in the year since. To give an example of this, I don't talk about myself really at all in the book, and I was actually a little bit criticized for this. But to give an example of this, I live in a rural Texas town, an hour and a half from any city, and about 20 minutes away from the next small rural town. Everywhere in Texas, trans children with supportive parents are at risk of being having the kids put in foster care.
Really?
Because abortion in any form
No,
is highly illegal.
that's not
it's a real
true.
struggle for feminine people.
What?
Or people who have F gender markers on their
What? This is just blatant lies, by the way. She just said that if you have a trans kid in Texas, you're in danger of having your kid taken away. No, that's not true. Abortion is highly illegal in Texas. No, that's not true either. Lies, lies, lies.
These to get hormones or even certain medications because pharmacists worry they may be liable for miscarriage, which carries a criminal penalty.
That's not true.
So even if you're not a person with a uterus, if you're past menopause,
Person with a uterus.
Pharmacists sometimes don't want to take the
Sometimes
risk.
we call that a woman.
The Attorney General announced yesterday that the Department of Motor Vehicles should draw up a list of people who've changed their gender markers on their driver's license. And it's also a heavily armed situation, particularly on the enemy side, not on our side. So, I live in this particular very narrow situation, and the path that got me here is different than the situation of many of my neighbors. But at the same time, we're all living in a global network. And the water that I'm drinking may be polluted and smell funny because of fracking operations, but the energy unleashed is, sold on the global market. Similarly, the objects around me are created by workers from all around the world, queer, trans, cis, straight, and intersex alike. Yet when Roe v. Wade fell and when the situation in Texas began to devolve, no one knew how to begin to intervene because the organs of class power here run the gamut from barely existent to definitely absent.
That's not true.
So we're in this totality.
Hang on. That's not true at all. And I know that because we've actually watched lots of socialist abortion stuff with people in Texas. There are a lot of socialists doing activism in Texas specifically around the issue of abortion. And I think I've streamed many of those streams on Socialism Saturday, to be honest. And one of the things they're particularly doing, by the way, is before Roe v. Wade even fell, they were finding ways to get abortion pills to women who lived in states where abortion was going to be banned. So everything this woman is completely uncredible. Just assume that most of the things she's saying are a lie. But we still need to know that she's saying them. She does believe them. Just because something is a lie doesn't mean that these people won't believe it.
And the laws of capital's totality are in full operation. But, while most working class people...
Dragon Water, I'm going to pick on you. They knew Roe v. Wade was going to fall. We've talked about this. These people were under no illusion. These people were 19 steps ahead of the pro-lifers every single day of the week. And we know that because we watched a live presentation from UC Berkeley the day after. It was either the day of or the day after the draft decision was released. And they said that they were already planning this stuff. They were very well aware. They knew what was going to happen. They wanted it to happen. We've talked about this. They wanted it to happen. And why did they want it to happen? Oh, because they kicked the pro-lifers' ass in the midterms. That's why. They will use it as a political wedge forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. That's why they never codified Roe v. Wade into law. They wanted it to happen. Because they wanted it to get repealed. They didn't codify it because they don't want to. They could have. I don't like people on the political right. You guys got to start wrapping your heads around this. Democrats want the issue of abortion on the table. They want pro-lifers to do exactly what pro-lifers are doing. Because when pro-lifers are doing exactly what they're doing, Democrats are raising record amounts of money. They are winning elections. They are having record youth voter registration and turnout. They will use abortion against you guys forever and ever and ever. And there ain't really a damn thing you can do about it now. All because Roe v. Wade got repealed because you guys couldn't help yourselves. They wanted it to happen.
Or don't know how to identify the inner workings of the economic totality here. They are seeing the damage. And so meanwhile, we're given mediated images of this totality. It's largely a non-interactive image.
Well, so to be honest though, Elena, Republicans don't really give a shit about saving babies. Both sides use it as a wedge issue. Both sides do it. Republicans don't give two shits about saving babies. If they did, Republicans would have compromised on like a common sense first trimester compromise a long ass time ago. Republicans would focus on winning over hearts and minds. They would have done pretty much anything that wasn't repeal Roe v. Wade. Neither side really cares. Both sides use it for politics. They do the same thing. It's just the Democrats are better at it.
Some of the things that I talk about in my book, Totality and Queer People Navigating the Terrain, I'd like to give that a new twist, because now we're in this position of permanent crisis, as was discussed in the HM conference recently. And capitalism isn't just the it's not just the terrain that we're stuck traversing, it's the destruction of the terrain that we're traversing. So we're in a sort of a Schumpeterian capitalism as creative destruction, the bombing, the cratering, the removing of the earth beneath our feet, the crumbling of paths. So I mean this, both literally and figuratively. Literally, the extractive capitalists are making the ground
The
sinking,
extractive
quake.
capitalists.
The overproduction of led to massive fires and floods, and crypto, burning through non-renewable
crypto! Oh
resources
no!
so that JPEGs of,
Oh no!
Bored apes can
Not
make a line go up.
crypto! Anything but
And
crypto!
COVID laid bare the absolute priority of profit over public health before the capitalist class eroded the most basic sentiments of social cohesion. Basic sentiments like it's bad when old people die, it's good to protect the chronically ill, and it's not acceptable for bunches of children to get sick. So at the beginning, this was kind of a far right proclamation that these propositions should be abandoned, and then the center caved, and now the left is shrugging off such norms. The secondary problem of terrain masquerades as superstructural, and I think that is some of the disruption and upheaval going on in social media platforms, which
like
in
Twitter.
their disruption is now, I think that they're now appearing as the capitalist apparatuses that they always were, rather than the town organizing squares that they seem to be.
She means Twitter.
They've always
This
been
was 2 days ago.
Terrain. I think that we need to take a look at Jodi Dean's arguments about communicative capitalism. These arguments, her arguments, predate the kind of algorithmic capitalism that we're looking at.
Algorithmic capitalism. How about that?
Now that our data is perpetually fed into a kind of our data is perpetually fed into a machine that is producing narrow intelligences that are increasingly supplanting our intellectual labor. The arguments getting hard to ignore, and I think that our arguments and our polemics are directly driving profitability. And so the more outrageous and argumentative we are, the better. And I think that this has affected queer people as well. So on the other hand, so we are we're losing some of our online spaces, and our
too bad, so
in-person
sad.
spaces have always been underfunded, if not unfunded. And while local organizing is both possible and necessary, as Marxists, we know that we can't end capitalism without broader connections. And as queer people, we're not necessarily safe in our physical locations. We may be part of larger immigrant diasporas. We remain connected to other oppressed communities across borders. So social media gives us networks while tracking us, harvesting data to sell and so forth, and while using that data to develop artificial neural networks that can be reified into products that de-skill intellectual labor. But since the unraveling of Left Book, and including some queer networks and queer lifelines, it's been different than the crumbling of parties and movements in the past. Because with the individualized presentation of the feeds and the shadow banning, it's just, been hard to know if people are just leaving and disappearing. So we can say that the terrain of we've have some kind of hard material problems of climate change and COVID for all of us, and then we have some of these more soft materialist problems of how we communicate on the left. And it's almost like we're finding ourselves coming out of a fog, and the fog is lifting, and instead of traversing a terrain, many of us are no longer trudging through a landscape, but we're sort of treading water in the dark, isolated, unsure of how to reconnect. And I wanted to, I'm going to skip through this, but I had a part of my presentation was connected to Richard Seymour's work on the twittering machine, where
the twittering machine.
Social media is designed to be a kind of a long, endless scroll, a forgetting machine where the past is totally malleable. And I was thinking
I
about
agree
this
with
in
that.
terms of something that Paul had said a while
Broken
ago.
clock is right twice a day. She's not wrong about that.
Queer Marxism was taken up in the 1990s, and I had brought this up in the preface to my new book. Not my new, but the new preface to the second edition of my book. Some of the history that emerged with the struggles between Marxist sects and queer people trying to use Marx in the 1990s, and a lot of that history had been lost. And I was trying to work on recovering some of that history that had been lost. And even today, on social media, there was this argument that the term queer had been invented in 2011 as a product of social media. And so there's this sense that there kind of is no ground. And
I mean, okay, again, this is an extremely valid point. Social media rewrites history all the time. I know this from direct experience. The things I have heard said about me on social media that have no basis in reality at all, it's absurd. It's actually ludicrous. And the reason I bring me up as an example of that is because it is never so clear how people lie over social media as when they're lying about you. And they're doing it aggressively, and they're doing it maliciously, and they're doing it to feed a narrative that they want fed. And you're like, I lived my life, motherfucker. I know what the truth is and what the truth isn't. And so when it happens to you specifically, you have a whole other perception on exactly how bad social media is when it comes to rewriting reality. And I would really strongly encourage everyone. I do my very best to try to take a nuanced take at things. I look at documents, I look at receipts. I really try not to listen to other people because I want to look at things on paper and I want to try to figure out what happened from actual, reality. But there are an awful lot of people out there and it's on all sides. This is not just the political left, it's not just the political right, it is everyone. There are a lot of people out there who are making shit up every single day that has no basis in reality at all. And it really makes me question, has it always been like this? Like, how much of our history that we think we know is actually true? Or have people just been making shit up all throughout history? Is it worse now with social media? I think probably. But be honest with yourselves, guys. No one can control you in regards to whether or not you choose to make shit up. But even people that I politically agree with, I find them doing this all the fucking time.
I think is one of the solutions that we could look towards. So the question here that I would like to pose is, if the ground is shifting and we're going through these difficulties, and if we are in this place of permanent reaction, we are at sea, the terrain that we're traversing has kind of given way, and we are swimming and trying to reconnect. What can we do? And so I have three kind of small propositions, and one would be to replace the disappearing endless scroll of social media with points of stability. So queer Marxist books, websites.
Queer Marxism is not a point of stability. That is not a point of stability at all.
And rebuilding more deeply connected networks post-COVID, rooted in comradely concern, keeping conceptual space for a real working class international within our local queer movements, not just expecting change through activism, uprising, tweets, and social media groups. All those things are things that will happen along the way. But if we're at sea, we're going to need to build ships. If we're alone in the sea, we're going to drown and disappear. If we're a network of people with just linked arms at sea, we're going to be a bit more stable. But when the first storm comes, we're going to disappear. So we need to build. And this could be really simple. And I would propose that we start with a large, a queer Marxist reader, a book marking the question. We now have one in Spanish, but not in English. I would like to see something like that eventually towards an internationalist queer, or it can't be called that if it's internationalist, because queer isn't an internationalist term. It could be called LGBTI. We could figure it out. But how I frame the term, queer Marxism, how I think about it is as an inquiry.
Andrew is asking a great question in the chat, and I want to make sure I highlight it. Why do people lack the foresight to know that saying falsehoods is not politically expedient in the long term? Hang on to your hat, Andrew. Most of the time, they get away with it. Most of the time, people who lie about things that have happened have absolutely no consequence exerted on them. They get away with it. They win. That's why. Because not enough people are paying close enough attention, and people are so tribalist that they will believe anything that sounds nice. And again, this happens on both sides. I've seen it happen on the left. I've seen it happen on the right. Someone says something like, "Ooh, that sounds nice." And they go with it being nice sounding and something they want to hear rather than it being the truth. People on both sides lie all the time, and probably 75% plus of the time they get away with it.
Into capitalism that generates multiple and sometimes even contradictory rules. About how capitalism generates multiple and sometimes even contradictory rules about gender and sexuality, how those rules and schema produce both alienations and openings. I think that we should think about other media as well, documentaries, websites, something like permanent fixtures. I think that we also, second, have to recognize that it's not only our side that is at sea. So capital is actually destroying ground and the terrain that we all travel. And everyone that doesn't have something solid to cling to is clinging to something. And unfortunately for us, gender stability is one of the most comfortable things for cis straight people to cling to. In fact, that's the reason why they're cis and straight. They were so comfortable that they stayed on their assigned paths. And capitalists can and are using their platform.
Straight cis people are only cis and straight because it was comfortable enough for us to stay. It was too comfortable for us to stay on our assigned path. If it wasn't so comfortable to be cis and straight, we would all be queer and non-binary. That's basically what you just said. Don't think, I mean, and that brings up a really good point. Think about the attacks on straight white men. Now, that really has nothing to do with them being straight or them being white or them being men. It's about making them uncomfortable. And the same could be true with straight white women or lesbian women for that matter, because they don't like lesbians either. They want to make people uncomfortable with being a part of the gender binary. I want to make sure people understand this because this is a really nuanced point. They're not attacking people because they're cis, straight, white men. That's not why they're doing it. They don't care if someone is a cis, straight, white man. It's not about that at all. It is about making people uncomfortable with the system. What did I say the 4 goals of the woke left were? No, it's not, Dragon Water. You've got this stuck in your craw, and it is not true. You need to look beyond this. It has nothing to do with men. It has nothing to do with women. It has nothing to do with straight. It has nothing to do with gay. It has nothing to do with cis. It has nothing to do with trans. It has nothing to do with any of that. It is about gaining as much power as possible by destabilizing the system so they can attack capitalism, so they can usher in their Marxist utopia. The only thing they care about is making you feel uncomfortable. Because if you feel uncomfortable with your identity in society, what does that do? That destabilizes the system. Because you feel uncomfortable. And you're going to blame someone for that discomfort. And they don't really care if you blame them. Because then you've created conflict. You've created tribalist conflict, which has destabilized the system even more. And then they're going to say, you know what's really to blame for your uncomfortability? Capitalism. Capitalism is to blame for all of this. Oh, that destabilizes the system even more. And now we're off to the races. Every single time you guys play into the narrative, which you're doing right now, Dragon Water, because you're having feelings about what I'm saying, because I know this is an important issue for you, but you're wrong. Every single time you play into the narrative of it's men versus women, it's white versus non-white, it's gay versus straight. Every single time you do that, you are playing into the narrative that they want you to accept. Because that in and of itself destabilizes the system. They do not care if you're a man. They don't care in the slightest. They don't care if you're white. They don't care if you're straight. They will say and do anything they need to do to create conflict, to destabilize the system, because they aren't going to get their little Marxist utopia if they don't. That's what it is.
Form ownership to profit off of this desire for a cis hetero security blanket. And I think that that's causing real violence for us. I see that all around me. And so that is something that I think that we need to take really seriously. And
exactly. It's a false flag. Exactly
I think that we need
right.
to go understand comradeliness as a baseline of supportiveness.
Exactly.
And have polemic and argumentation, but understand that sometimes polemic and argumentation can also be is commodified on under platform capitalism. And so while I'm not convinced that we got this, as was really common to say a few years ago, I am convinced that we can build this and that we don't have to tread water, and that we can form new ships from the wreckage of the past and find land and chart our way towards the future and future comrades who can build
future comrades
communist sexuality.
A communist sexuality. Holy shit.
Thank you, Holly. I love the metaphor. Peter, do you want to continue with the metaphor or switch to another?
I'll go all over the place, if I may. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Holly. That was an inspiriting way to launch the discussion. And I strongly agree with almost everything you said, almost. But before I bounce off what Holly had to say, let me use a couple of the questions that were asked in the invitation to the event to structure what I'm going to say. One of the questions that made me think, a question that I'd like to put in question, was what accounts for the burgeoning of queer Marxism? And that led me to ask the question, are we burgeoning? I think what we've been seeing for the past decade or so is what I'd call a boomlet of queer Marxism.
Have we? I don't remember him.
Some articles,
it's possible.
Some sessions at conferences, which is great. And I've loved being part of it. It's not quite a mass movement yet. And so when I think of why has this boomlet happened and what are its limits, it seems to me, on the one hand, what we're definitely seeing burgeoning, what we have seen burgeoning for the past 30 years, is a queer milieu, a queer movement that's been growing bigger and bigger and more active and radicalized. So queer Marxism is a small part of what's latched onto that, I think. And on the other hand, we do see something of a boom lately in Marxism and the historical materialism conferences and the growth of a milieu around historical materialism have been a significant part of that. What I think that reflects, this is my hunch, is the crisis of capitalism starting from around 2008, which sort of put an end to the end of history, made people say capitalism is not working. It's not the best of all possible worlds that we were told it was. And so there's a lot of anti-capitalist sentiment out there. And so queer Marxism has formed at the junction of these two things.
Don't think for one red second that inflation wasn't exactly what these people wanted. You know how they just printed money? These people will print money every day of the week. They want inflation. Because what does inflation mean? Pop quiz. Why would these people want there to be record inflation? Pop quiz in the chat. Yes, I am actually quizzing you. That's how you topple the economy. Unstable markets. Sharpen the conflict. Get everyone to blame the evil capitalists. Destabilize the system. Crash the system. Destabilize the capitalist system. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Inflation makes everyone poorer. And then the people cry for the evil capitalists to be taken out of power. They wanted inflation. Why do you think they want to cancel all student debt? They're going to have to print a lot of money to do that. Why do you think they're sending billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine? Why do you think they want to do any of the government programs that they're proposing? It destabilizes the system and it makes people mad. And when people get mad, they're going to give them someone to blame. And you know who they're going to give them to blame? It's the capitalists' fault. It's their fault that they're charging you so much for food. It's their fault that they're raising the prices of your gas or your medicine or whatever else you need. It's the fault of capitalism. That's what they're doing.
This big and growing queer milieu and this tentatively growing anti-capitalist sentiment that has taken form in a slowly growing Marxist milieu, because Marxism offers the most coherent, rigorous critique of capitalism that there is. But what we don't have is a mass working class movement, which is supposed to be what Marxism is about. And the queer Marxism we have is not rooted in working class, but we are actually beginning to see a modest wave of working class struggles coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the current rise of inflation and the attacks on working people's living standards. We're seeing some strike waves and so forth. But so far, what we haven't seen, I would say, is the junction that's necessary for Marxism between Marxist thought and active working class movements. That hasn't happened yet. Until it happens, we're talking about something fairly limited as Marxism and something fairly limited when we're talking about queer Marxism. Now, queer Marxism is not yet rooted in the struggles of working class queer people. So that's one major challenge I think we face. And so what's the work we need to do? This is a second question that was asked in the invitation to this event. And I would like to focus on three major challenges. There are more, but I'll just focus on 3 for now. One is a question around gender, which I think really relates to Holly's work and what Holly just had to say. A second is a question around what I call queer geopolitics, which is something I've been focusing on particularly in my own work. And the third is a question about climate and ecology, which actually I'd like to throw out at Alan, because I think he's been doing some particularly exciting thinking about it, and I hope we'll go into that more today. But let me take each of those 3 challenges in turn. First, around gender. Where do I have a nuance of difference with what Holly was laying out? I feel a certain tension in what Holly said. On the one hand, she said, we live under capitalism. You can correct me if I was getting you wrong, Holly, but we live under capitalism, and we live with gender and sexuality that are part of the way capitalism shapes us and shapes our bodies. And the truly queer, gendered, and sexualized world is going to exist under communism, and that'll be a different world and a wonderful world, we expect and hope. My question, and on the other hand, Holly talked about small rural Texas towns where you have trans kids facing terrible attacks and terrible odds to be what they are. Well, that's a hard life those kids are living, but that's something new under capitalism. The numbers of self-identified trans people in the world is growing. Non-binary people.
Oh, they love that.
Growing.
They love it, love it, love it, love it, love it.
And what Holly has laid out in her work about how the straight cisgender patterns that, as she said rightly, people are clinging to in very difficult times, and the way they fit into how capitalism reproduces itself socially, that's under a bigger threat in a way than it has been for a long time. Not from mass movements, but at a molecular level in people's lives. More and more people are dissenting and rebelling at a certain level, even as children, even in isolated towns. So I think one of the big challenges for us as queer Marxists is to try to build a bridge between these basic forms of dissent and rebellion that are out there and that are growing, and the communist future we imagine. So that's something I hope we can talk about. I think it's a transitional approach, and here's a real disagreement Holly and I have had in the past. I think it means confronting what some queer Marxists like me call homonormativity.
Homonormativity.
A concept that Holly has questioned in the past in her book, and in a central way in the new preface to her book. And I still think it's a useful concept, because it sums up what people are rebelling against. And
they're rebelling against homonormativity, as opposed to so homonormativity is going to be like gay people, just like straight like gay people or lesbians, versus queer people. I'm pretty sure that's what he's saying. So like trans versus not trans sort of thing. And by the way, trans doesn't mean transition, it means transform. Chew on that for a minute. Hang on, I saw a chat I wanted to display. Coaster Trek, did he get the memo that communism doesn't work? What would they say to the idea if you said communism doesn't work, these are bad ideas, they have never worked in the history of humanity? What are these people going to say? We watched it month and a half ago. What are they going to say? One person wrote a whole book about how communism has never worked. These people have produced entire texts that say it with me, say it with me. Real communism hasn't been tried. It 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 wasn't real. Every single time.
I agree, Holly and I think all of us agree in rejecting a kind of moralism, a kind of queer moralism that would say, and this came out in Holly's remarks again, and I totally agree. You don't change the world by looking down on people who are trying to survive and to get by in the world that exists now. So you don't sneer at people who get, same-sex couples who get married, for example.
Oh,
but
shit.
I think
where'd our captions go?
We do want to
there are the captions.
Support people's
Where are the captions showing up?
For example, against all the legal,
my bad. Sorry, guys, that was my fault.
Forms that punish people when, for example, they don't get married. And there are a lot of forms, legal and social pressures out there that do penalize people for not fitting in to homonormativity. So I think that's something queer Marxism
homonormativity.
Has to be about. And I think the question of how
that's a new one I hadn't heard before.
Queer people, trans people, non-binary people in their rebellion against homonormativity, that's a crucial challenge we face.
Homonormativity.
So that's one challenge I hope we can talk about more. Second challenge is the geopolitical question that I've been wrestling with for some years now, starting in Warped, but I think going more deeply into it since Warped came out. When we look at the world around us, it's a world of instability and danger, and queer issues are bound up with the clashes in the world more than issues of gender and sexuality have ever been overtly raised in geopolitical clashes before. When you see somebody like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, when he was president, which we're all glad he's not president anymore, but that he made a big point of attacking Judith Butler, that's something new.
Really?
When China and Taiwan are in a serious set of tensions, and one of the subjects that is raised as part of these tensions is that you have same-sex marriage in Taiwan, whereas the People's Republic of China is rolling back some of the gains that LGBTIQ people have been making in mainland China in the past. Well, that's something new in the world. A geopolitical conflict where queer issues are being raised in a fairly central way. And the same with Ukraine and Russia. I think it's important to note that Ukraine is way more backward than Taiwan when it comes to LGBTIQ issues, certainly no same-sex marriage. We've seen trans women desperate to get out of Ukraine and being stopped at the border because their documents say they're men, so they have to stay in Ukraine and fight the Russians. But nonetheless, under the pressure of geopolitical conflict, Ukraine has been profiling itself, rebranding itself in a fairly homo-nationalist way, we could say.
Homo-nationalist way.
Western, and therefore pro-LGBTIQ. Whereas Russia, in the course of this conflict, and because of this conflict, has been intensifying the repression of LGBTIQ people. So I think there's a challenge here for us as queer Marxists to address what's going on geopolitically. I think the way I've theorized this in articles in the recent past and in my introduction to the Castilian edition of Warp is to talk about the vicious cycle, the vicious circle between homo-nationalism, which of course Jasper Puor theorized, and what I've called heteronationalism, which is the mirror image of it, the at least equally reactionary mirror image of it on the other side. And I think this is a challenge that it would be great for us to address and to make ourselves part of the world that people are living through, threatened by in a big way today. And the last question is this question of climate and ecology. I have to say, as I was working on the new introduction to the Castilian edition of Warped, I said, there's a crucial thing I'm leaving out here, because clearly, as Holly mentioned, climate change is a major, major threat to people that people feel. And I sort of said, well, what does this have to do with us as queer Marxists?
Why are they pushing climate change? Pop quiz, pop quiz, pop quiz in the chat. Why are they pushing climate change? To what means are these people pushing climate change? Why are they doing it? Why? I know you guys know the answer to this. Why are these people pushing climate change? To disrupt the system! To gain as much power as possible, to be anti-capitalist. Yes. They're going to blame climate change on capitalism, guys. It's all going to be capitalism's fault. Everything, I mean fucking everything that these people do can be traced back to our four truths. I'm going to call them the four truths. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. Everything. I want to challenge you guys. Can you name for me one single thing that the woke left does that does not lead back to our four truths? That's going to be the title of my next book, The Four Truths of Socialism. Something like that. I honestly, though, fact check me on this, though, because I really want to make sure that I'm correct about this. I'm pretty sure I am. I have watched thousands of hours of these people that have led me to this conclusion. But if you can think of something that these people are pushing that does not lead back to gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia, name one single thing. I want to that's your challenge for the rest of this Socialism Saturday. Really, like steel man my argument. If capitalism didn't exist, then these countries wouldn't be pushing these things that impact climate change. Businesses impact climate change more than anything else. Production impacts climate change more than anything else. Businesses are trying to maximize profit. Therefore, they will always put maximizing profit over the environment.
On the surface, I couldn't quite see what it had to do with us. And then Alan was generous enough to let me read a draft of this book he's working on, where there's a whole chapter about just this subject. And I thought it was brilliant and exciting. And since I've talked a fair amount already, I'll leave it to him to go into it, but I hope he does, because I think this is another challenge that can show how queer Marxism can be a crucial tool in facing something that's a major threat to the survival of what we call civilization.
Of humanity.
So I'll
major threat to the survival of humanity.
Thanks very much, Peter. Alan, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. And it's really delightful to be here with this particular collection of people. We've had exciting discussions in the past, and my remarks are going to be a little bit limited because I'm looking forward to the discussion part of the roundtable. But I am going to say a little bit, and I really love the way Holly framed this whole discussion in terms of terrain. I think that understanding that we are on ground that is always shifting, that it is incredibly dynamic, that we need to understand that ground and act on it is incredibly important. And at the current moment, in terms of queer Marxism and the understanding of this terrain, personally, at least, I will say that I feel a combination between excitement, because I think there have been really interesting and important developments.
Hang on. I want to address someone in the chat. Doesn't matter. It does not matter if it's a scam. It does not matter. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. All of this is a scam. Everything these people do is a scam. Don't deflect from the issue, because this is not going to work. This is going to let them win. Brett Weinstein is a moron. I'm sorry. Like, no, I shouldn't say that. He is very smart in some ways. There are people that are extraordinarily gifted in some ways. And then when it comes to other things, they are absolute idiots. The fact that Brett Weinstein cannot see what is going on means that he is very, very exceptionally gifted and smart. And I don't want to take anything away from the things that he's really gifted and smart at. There are absolutely things that Brett Weinstein is amazing at. But being able to understand politics and culture is not one of those things. It's just not. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses, all right? Everyone is gifted in some ways. But there are also certain ways that he's kind of dumb. I'm sorry. Like, I don't mean to be insulting.
Over the last 10, 15 years, that I think years ago, when I was first becoming active as a Marxist and trying to figure out queerness in relation to Marxism, I wouldn't have anticipated the scale of development, the excitement of Holly's book, of Peter's book, of Kevin Floyd's work, and the incredible accomplishment of the book Transgender Marxism that I hope everyone who's listening has read, but if not, get to it really quickly. It's really a rich, multidimensional collection that's a challenge in so many ways, in all the right ways. So there's the excitement at seeing people thinking, acting, and so on, developing our tool chest at a time when, boy, do we need it. And Holly, in terms of the terrain, was sketching out some of the ways that we need it. Peter added others in terms of the geopolitics, a particular expression of that geopolitics. So on the one hand, I feel an excitement. And on the other hand, I feel a certain despair, because I feel at the same time, personally, a kind of intellectual political isolation that's connected to our current weakness of organization, which I see as a global issue. And so we're facing assault in various ways, in somewhat fragmented form. And that makes the kind of development that we're talking about challenging. So on the one hand, we've got developing tools, and on the other hand, we have a certain experience of fragmentation and so on. I don't want to overstate that. There are some brilliant movements, there's some incredible fightbacks, and there's incredibly resilient organizing going on, but there's these challenges. So overall, to me personally, I will say queer Marxism means a commitment to act on and look at, learn about capitalist social reality through at once a queer lens and a Marxist lens. And that also means looking at Marxism through a queer lens, asking
this is getting real meta. This is getting real meta real quick.
And looking at queerness through a Marxist lens. All of this with an aspiration towards integration, but understanding that any integration is going to be ongoing work. It's not simply that we finally find the formula, the perfect calculus formula that tells us what a queer Marxism is. A lot because, exactly as Holly started us, the terrain is always shifting. And so as you think that you've developed a way of explaining certain things and so on, the world shifts, movements shift, goals arise, new voices push their way into the conversation and so on. In my own experience personally, just to kind of ground this a little bit, I learned really about queerness largely through a lens that I would call gay liberation. That will date me in many ways compared
Wow.
to, I hope, some of the people listening. That came through publications, through organizing, and through mentors. And it was really a mentorship relationship, hearing stories from people who've been activists longer than I as I came out, and hearing about the tool chest that they had developed that had a lot of power and a lot of shortcomings, as any perspective does. So it was integrating queerness that I'd learned through a lens of gay liberation, essentially, with Marx.
So I want to point this out because we've seen this over the past several weeks with Socialism Saturday, where you'll have people like this that are maybe a little bit older that say something to the effect of, I came to Marxism as part of like the gay rights struggle, and they evolved it into Marxism. Now, the gay rights struggle was real, right? There were very real realities in this country in which gay people were, quite frankly, shit on really unfairly. We can't deny those realities. This is why when conservatives try to do things like ban gay marriage, it comes back to bite them in the ass, because that's a real thing. Okay? But what happens is these activist movements get people like this guy who came in the struggle for quote unquote gay liberation, which was really just the fight for gay marriage and acceptance and being able to adopt kids and things like that, being able to basically do the things that like straight people can do, but like not in heterosexual relationships. And they evolve into being a Marxist, because it's like activism is a training ground for these people. They might be trying to achieve real things, but there comes a point where the people who really get off on activism, they don't want to stop fighting. They want to fight for that next thing and that next thing after that and that next thing after that. And I really think that we always need to be very, very careful to say, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There were very real challenges when it came to gay people in this country. There were very real challenges when it came to African American people in this country. Those are real. We always need to acknowledge those. But there is a line between those struggles and what these people are doing now, which is completely different.
That I learned through a long time political activism, joining a Marxist organization,
That's
and
right.
Developing Marxism.
Exactly,
and
Sin.
These things developed in separate parts of my brain at some level, or separate reference groups, separate bodies of knowledge, separate ways of acting. And the challenge of integration then is something that I felt internally as I would move back and forth between spaces and figure out, am I being the same person in these spaces? Are we talking the same language in these spaces? And how do we make sure that what we're concerned about in the queer room is also in the Marxist room, which certainly, I mean, in the International Socialists
Hang on,
in Canada,
I want to answer Bot's question. Because Bot's been trying to get my attention the entire chat and has been creating a ruckus over nothing. But Bot is actually asking a question I want to answer now. Am I addicted to watching Socialists? Yes. That's part of why we're doing Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is so I get to watch socialism in a controlled setting, and I get to do it with friends. I'm addicted to all things dystopian. I always have been. I find it to be fascinating. And so, but I also think it's important, but like, you know, I mean, there is something to be said for the fact that like, it's like watching like a horror movie. It's like, what's going to come next? What's going to happen next? Or like driving by a car wreck. It's like, you can't help but like stick your neck up and like try to look at that car wreck. It's like, you know, it's going to be bad, but you want to look at it anyway. That's how I feel about socialism. If I had my way, this is awful. If I had my way, we would do Socialism Saturday like 3 times a week. But I want to try to rein it in a little bit. I can't force you guys to watch socialism every day. So I restrict it to like 1 day out of the week. But I would really watch this stuff every day of the week. I would. Yes, I make you share my suffering. if we're going to be masochists, we can be masochists together.
There was an amazing, it was actually the first kind of authentically integrated organization I'd ever been in. Just the social spaces,
it's
the feeling, the discussion, so on. When I moved to England at that point and became active in the SWP in England, I didn't feel that same same integration and so on.
Look what Myriad's saying about the baby growing things, that they're really freaky and they talk about babies like they're a product, including designing your baby at the genetic level. Yes, because these people want to eliminate all biological ties. That's them. That's them doing the baby growing. And people are playing right into it. It's like, no, stop the baby growing immediately. Stop it.
Pulling these things together, I felt biographically to make sense of my own activism, to figure out tools that, rather than sitting on this side or that side, actually pulled these things together. And it's been a work in progress that I've been working on for a long time. Peter's been working on for a long time. A lot of people have been working on for a long time, and there's been an amazing process. And the challenge of integration then is that it's not just a formula to guide us.
Fucking love steampunk.
But it's also recognizing that the shifting terrain means that we need to think a lot about what we thought was the formula. We need to understand, we need to explain, we need to organize, we need to act, and there's huge political challenges to do this. And the terrain has included a weakening of Marxism during the time that I've been a socialist activist, an erosion of some of the previous forms of infrastructure of dissent, the ways of organizing that gave us power together, and the erosion of socialist organizing, not to say disappearance. And there's exciting reemergences and there's exciting exploration, but we've seen an erosion of Marxism, and at the same time, a dynamism in certain ways in queer circles. Certainly when I first came out, there was little mainstream or public presence where I was, and that is certainly a change, but a complex one, as Peter's saying, because some of that public presence now is exactly being used by the right in very specific ways. We've seen the development of rights in certain spaces for certain people, a movement that has increasingly, in its official forms, been dominated by white middle class, better off, cisgendered men, and a dynamism that we've seen in terms of the emergence of trans organizing, trans theoretics, racialized organizing, and trying to figure out what all of this means in terms of a queer Marxism. And so I'm today, and I do think conversation for me is kind of a privileged form of it. I fear that even the paper form that we tend to have at conferences, which its origins, I would argue, are more academic than political, and we often will kind of go and present and listen and so on. But this idea that we have a collective project, we need workshops to produce a collective project, which is to develop modes of thinking and acting that actually work, and that we try them out and test them out and feedback and so on. And I do think that that's one of the challenges for us now. And I think both Peter and Holly talked about this in somewhat different languages, but this idea that there's lots of exciting stuff going on. What does it mean to integrate this together and to have this sense of a collective project? So we're not just each kind of trying to wing it and figure out, this is my formulation, what's yours, but we're trying to develop something together. And I'm going to just say a little bit about where I'm at in terms of this work.
Hang on. Hang on. We need to explain this for people who haven't been here, and it's okay. It's okay if you're new. Trans is not the oppressed class any longer. Hang on to your hats, folks. Trans does not mean transition. It does not mean like what you might think of it as with like Buck Angel or Blair White. It doesn't mean that to these people. Trans to these people means transform. transform. It doesn't mean going from man to woman or woman to man. It means to transform the concept of gender. Why do we want to transform the concept of gender? Do you guys know how so many of these people use like he, they pronouns or she, they pronouns? Because they do not subscribe to the gender binary. That means they don't consider themselves to be a man or a woman. They want everyone to be non-binary. So they're trying to get rid of gender entirely, because getting rid of gender destabilizes the system, and it also attacks capitalism because gender is kind of necessary for the biological family. It don't mean that no more. Well, not to these people. This is still, so what I'm talking about is a concept that's in like the farthest of the far left space. It hasn't made its way into the mainstream yet, but these people are absolutely talking about this. In fact, you can watch Socialism Saturday from like 2-3 weeks ago. They did a whole panel about this. Abolishing gender doesn't mean abolishing gender stereotypes. It means abolishing the gender binary. That's why they're always talking about the gender binary. They want to get rid of the idea of man and woman. That's what they're going for. They're not attacking women. They're not attacking men. They want to get rid of the idea of men and women. And again, this is coming from the farthest left of the far left. This is in the radical spaces, right? So what that means is that's going to make its way into the mainstream. It's already kind of starting to make its way into the mainstream, like a little tiny bit. But we're looking at like maybe 2 to 3 years. So what you're hearing from me right now is about 2 to 3 years ahead of where mainstream culture is. That's why you watch Socialism Saturday, by the way. This is like a sneak preview of all the bullshit that's coming. 2-3 years, watch. That's what's going to happen. Yes, transform into communism. Exactly.
Then I really hope that we will develop this through conversation. But I will say that specifically and given that he's here, I should credit Paul, because the book that I'm working on right now actually began in certain.
Hang on, follow-up question. How many people really believe that? You don't need a lot of people to believe it for it to become a thing. There doesn't need to be a significant amount of people who believe it. It only matters if the right people believe it and if it plays into what they already want to do. So yes, this is a threat. This is a serious thing. We are going to see this show up in the mainstream in a couple of years. That's going to happen. I'll take my I told you so then, when we see it on CNN or something. Do you guys wonder why we've seen such a rapid increase in terms of teenagers identifying as non-binary? In the schools, when they're pushing the gender ideology in the schools, it's usually not that the kids are transitioning from one gender to another. It's that they're identifying as non-binary, gender non-conforming. Anytime you hear stories about the record number of kids identifying as gender non-conforming or non-binary, you got to think this. That's where it's coming from. So it has already started. I've heard of high schools where like 50% of kids, 50 identifies like non-binary or gender non-conforming. That's where it's coming from.
Certain ways with a provocative question that Paul asked at a historical materialism conference that I was one of the panelists on, and Paul was the chair of the panel. And he essentially said, okay, we've got lots of interesting conversation here. Let me just ask a very provocative question about queer Marxism, which is essentially, why don't we have sex in the middle of the day when it's bright out and when our energies are at their peak, or whenever it is that anyone's energies are at the peak? I know we don't all peak at the same moment. Why is it at, like off in the darkness? Why is it when our energies have already been expended on other things? What would it mean to think about sex not as something that's marginalized, but as something that is centered in terms of fulfillment and so on? And why does that happen? And for me, this led me to think a lot about the queer Marxist tool chest. And I think one of the things that we've underdeveloped in our thinking about queer Marxism is basically a focus that's there in Marxism from the outset, and certainly it's there in Marx's early work, but I would argue all the way through, the fact that we talk about working class and so on, is this focus on people as makers at the core of the project. And what does it mean to think of people as makers in the material sense?
Yes, exactly, Trendolin.
Always acting on the world around us to produce what we need and want and fulfill our needs and so on. But also in a sense as world makers. We are also, as we work on the world around us, we're creating a reality, we're creating meaning, we do this in shared ways, and that there is an inherent fulfillment in this labor of transformation and transforming the world around us.
Transforming to communism.
Self-realization. We actually create ourselves, we realize ourselves, we fulfill ourselves. This process in ways that isn't talked about very much in Marx, and I would argue Marxism hasn't explored enough, this process of people as makers, this process of making is suffused in eroticism.
Really?
We have tended to under discuss that.
Fused in eroticism.
And have tended to focus on the kind of practical instrumental side of making. So what does it mean to center eroticism differently in our understanding of humans as makers? And therefore, what does that mean when we begin to think about humans as makers under capitalism, whereas Marx pointed out that our whole process of making is centrally defined around alienation? That rather than making for inherent fulfillment and so on, rather than acting on the world to directly meet our wants and needs as a social grouping. Instead, because of dispossession, because we don't own and control the means of production, because our relationships of reciprocity with each other, with other...
That was an interesting slip, wasn't it? He said, because we don't control the means of production. Because we, the Marxists, don't control the means of production. All this is happening, all the bad capitalists are in control because the Marxists don't control the means of production. These people really think that if they instill their little Marxist utopia, they're going to be the ones in charge. They don't know yet that they're going to be the first against the wall. That's why they want to abolish private property, because abolishing private property gives them, well, this is what they think. They think it gives them more power because they will be the ones in charge. They want to abolish private means of production so that they can control them. Now, again, what they don't know is that they're never going to be in charge. That's never going to happen. But that's what they think is going to happen, and we need to be aware of that. Just because what they think is a fantasy that they've made up doesn't mean they won't act as though it's true.
With other human groupings, with the world around us, with other species, have been disrupted by processes of dispossession, capitalist seizure of the means of production, the land, the material resources of the earth, human capacities, and so on. Because of that, we end up in a situation where capitalists control the process of production, capitalists control the product at the end of the day. And so rather than making oriented towards fulfillment, we end up with making oriented towards getting a wage. It's a means to an end. And what does it mean when our fundamental capacities are instrumentalized in that way, become a means to an end, and are subordinated in that way, are under the control of the employer at the direct point of production, but also in various ways, the state and so on, in ways that I'm not going to talk about it. And I think we looking at the way that this affects our relationship with each other, our own bodies, the earth, and so on, is something that I think queer Marxism can contribute to these discussions. I'll briefly say now, but I would welcome in discussions talking much more about this, where this relates to what Peter was saying about, and very generously, and I really appreciate that, Peter, thank you, in terms of ecology, is that, just briefly for now, that that the disruption of relations of reciprocity through dispossession, our relations with the earth, with other peoples, with our community, and so on, being based on reciprocity, the idea that what you take, you give back, you have a responsibility for renewing resources that you use, which has been a central human ethos, I would argue, in many ways, in many different cultural forms. What does it mean when that becomes one of instrumentalizing, of using as a means to an end, of exploiting and extracting? And what does that relationship mean to our relationship with nature internally, that is our own bodies, and externally the world around us? And I think there's a lot more to be said about that, but I do think that the ecological crisis is not simply a crisis out there, but there's also a crisis in here in terms of our relationship with our own bodies, and that queer Marxism helps us understand the links that are there. So I'm not sure if I think I might have overly abridged to say something brief here and get something on the record, and I really appreciate the conversation, and I firmly believe that we integrate, in fact, through conversation, which includes, and here I think what Holly said about comradely mistakes and comradely engagement and stuff, it includes learning through experiment, where you try to say something, people say that didn't make any sense, and through working together, we actually develop a new understanding and so on. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. I'll just make a few remarks before we move forward. And it seems to me that I want to start by observing Marx's statement at the beginning of the 18th Brumaire, where he attributes to Hegel the observation that all great events and characters of world history occurred twice. But Hegel apparently forgot to add the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. Well, we must now be somewhere close to the worst situation in terms of tragedy and the worst situation in terms of farce. And they no longer, to a great extent, allow us to actually engage in a meaningful politics. An example of this is the forgetting that we do. And I'm thinking particularly of the forgetting that is behind the current malaise of a mixture of a bourgeois war which seeks to paint one side as white hats and the other side as black hats, in the same old tired way, when we know that although Putin's behavior is inexcusable, he's hardly fighting against a socialist country. Likewise, the current poverty, immiseration, low income, attacks on the working class, these occurred just a decade after capitalism ate itself, and ate itself quite comprehensively.
When did capitalism eat itself?
And there was after that an upsurge of interest in Marx. And yet somehow we seem to be in the same situation.
What did they just say? What did they just say that got my attention? Capitalism ate itself round about 2007. Does anyone remember what happened round about 2007? Because I do. And they said around about 2007, there was an uptick in interest in Marx. What happened in 2007? The housing market crashed. The financial crisis. Exactly. Financial crisis. We're about to see an uptick in exactly what these people want because of inflation and the economy. And it's only going to get worse. You guys think they've given up on this student loan thing. They have not given up on this student loan thing. I promise you.
Again. Now, what can queer Marxism contribute? And I suppose for me, queer Marxism is the extension of dialectical critique. It is taking that fundamental critique, a materialist, historical, and dialectical critique, with the class subject, the class material subject, instantiated in the relations of production as the core, and adding to it these features which include the sensual, the sexual. Think, for example, of Feuerbach's first thesis, and not just this 11th, but actually brings these aspects of our lives into play and centrally into politics. That makes that personal and political conjoin. Now, I agree with Holly that this is a totalizing analysis, but I think it's an already contradictory totalizing analysis. There are always contradictions, there are always problems, there are always points of mediation and points of rupture within that critique. For the last 125 years, insofar as there has
I'm going to hold you to that, bot. You just made a commitment.
Sexual politics, it has been primarily identarian. Now, I think Peter makes an excellent point. It's easy on the left to say, because it hasn't been revolutionary in moving forward, it's always glass half empty. And I recall both Peter's book and more Jeffrey Weeks' book, The World We Have Won, in 2007, where he points out, for all the particular ideological critiques we might have, the reality is, in the previous 60, 65, 70 years, people's lives have changed.
They accused him of that because it's true.
I am critical of homonormativity. I think it does extend
homonormativity. What the fuck?
It does extend alienation, but there is a way of engaging in critique which doesn't alienate.
Hang on.
Which doesn't preach. Which doesn't.
I need to Google homonormativity real quick. I need to get a definition. Homonormativity. Because I think it's like queer versus like, okay. Homonormativity in Wikipedia is the privileging of the heteronormative ideals and constructs into LGBT culture and identity. It is predicated on the assumption that the norms and values of heterosexuality should be replicated and performed among homosexual people. Ain't that some shit? This is like these people saying the gay rights movement was all for show. We never really wanted gay marriage. Gay marriage was the first issue I was ever politically active on in Vermont. And now these people are saying, when they say homonormativity is a problem, they're saying, psych, we never really wanted marriage in the first place. They're saying that years of struggle for gay people to be treated the same way as straight people is just like, it wasn't even worth it. It's homonormativity. We have to throw it all out and start again. God damn it.
Say, look, what's important here is that we are standing with you while we are pointing out the weaknesses.
Maximus. Excellent point. In other words, gay people wanted to be capitalists too. And guess what? Gay people have more disposable income than straight people, more or less. God damn it. It's always something with these people. It's never good enough. They don't want any of this. They just want to destabilize. That is exactly correct. Though everything is a scam. Every single thing these people do is a scam.
In your position, just as you can see the weaknesses in ours. That identarian moment has been important, but it's been more about recognition than redistribution. And it's been more about normativities than it has been about revolution and emancipation. And commodification has shown just how effective it is in characterizing new and open relationships. So as we get a greater sense of sexual openness in some parts of the world, equally they are commodified. Alan raised the issue that I often raise, that against identity, we have to put practice. And I think practice is really important. The messy physicality of erotic desire and of sexual practices. And often I do
messy
think there are
physicality.
times when we get into debates around queerdom and sexualities, and we forget that they're supposed to involve some form of pleasure. I can actually remember being at a conference where it was pointed out that writing was getting progressively more forensic in an intellectual academic style, and not as it was in some of the writings of the 60s through to the 80s, really gripping you emotionally as well as intellectually. So I think there are things we should keep in mind around practice and that messy physicality. My own current work, I'm currently series editor of a book series called Sex and Intimacy in Later Life with Trish Batchford and Paul Simpson. And we started that because we realized that lots of people were talking about different sexual identities, but nobody was talking about the pathologies of older people's sex lives. We talk an awful lot about childhood, but not about the other end.
No one wants to think about older people having sex. No offense, older people.
With ideas of different sexual practices, such as those that compose that amorphous notion of
Listen,
BDSM,
all sex is very messy, but you make a good point, George. There is extra prepping that needs to occur.
And those sorts of practices, for example, domination, submission games are often seen as aping capitalism, when they should also be seen as creating ruptures.
What the fuck did I just hear? That just came out of nowhere. They were like, dominance and submission is about capitalism, but then it's about creating ruptures. Creating ruptures is not something you want to think about when you're having sex. We need to rewind that. That really caught me off guard. This is why I love queer Marxism. It's like you just never know what you're going to hear.
I also think there is much to be done in playing with ideas of different sexual practices, such as those that compose that amorphous notion of BDSM, which is best defined by what it isn't. And those sorts of practices, for example, domination, submission games, are often seen as aping capitalism, when they should also be seen as creating ruptures.
Oh, they create ruptures.
The charmed circle, as Rubin called it, and opening up people to new sexual ideas. Part of a queer Marxism has to be that practice as well as identity.
Part of queer Marxism needs to be about opening up people to new sexual ideas. They want to disrupt every social structure in society. So, you guys know how in Brave New World, they're like, everyone belongs to everyone else, and no one is allowed to have like steady like boyfriends or girlfriends or husbands. There are no families because everyone belongs to everyone else. And they all go to orgies, and you might sleep with one person one night and another the next night, and you might sleep with several people the night after that, because everyone belongs to everyone else. That's what they're talking about. This is Brave New World level bullshit. We have not watched Brave New World yet. We will. We will. Everyone is polyamorous. Yes. You got to think of it like every structure. This is why queer Marxism is so fucking amazing. And by amazing, I mean incredibly dystopian. Because queer Marxism is not just about like trans stuff. That's not what it's about at all. Queer Marxism is about disrupting every single structure that exists in our society. All of them. Everything. They want to turn it all on its head. That's what they think of as liberation or abolition. And it's all capitalism's fault. Monogamy, capitalism. Everything.
has to be that engagement with pleasure and erotics. And Alan was nice enough to say something about something I said at a conference. I genuinely think the Mediterranean model, where the siesta can be something more than a siesta, is a really good way of putting it.
Something
It's a
more
really
than
good
a
way
siesta.
of thinking, at least thinking the problem. Also, incidentally, queer Marxism.
I'm feeling a little groomed by this presentation. Is anyone else feeling groomed right now? There are people on Twitter that would argue that I'm grooming you just by showing you this presentation.
Has to be a supportive of asexual people and people for whom there is low sexual desire or there are other priorities.
Yes.
We are not preaching a singular progressive notion.
God
and
damn
after
it.
all, that's one of the contribution queer makes to Marxism. It actually constantly wants to destabilize.
I'm grooming
in the
everyone.
way I have always argued dialectics should. So in that respect, I think it's important to have a totalizing analysis, but recognize contradictions. Equally, queer Marxism has to recognize that the conjoining of a queer critique and a Marxist critique have their problems. Queer is fundamentally a-foundational. Marxism is fundamentally foundational. It's called historical materialism. Queer is about subject.
I don't disagree. He's probably hard right now.
Whereas Marxism focuses on communalities.
Oh God,
queer
I feel like that needs to be on a t-shirt. Groom this comrade.
In the production of sexual lives, whereas Marxists will prefer to look in terms of alienation, ideology, and hegemony. No, there may be terminological differences with some affinities, but I think there's still methodological difficulties we have to account for and accept and understand. That doesn't weaken the queer Marxist project because nobody wants to stamp one singularity to it. But that's what I think queer Marxism is about. It's about the extension of critique. And I see much of the discussion within those extensions in culture. I think the cultural and aesthetic area
I have taken the innocence of many people.
From a material critique into a critique about sexual practices, sexual identities, sexual
Some might say I get off on taking the innocence of people.
And in that respect, I'm very much a fan of Raymond Williams. I use his quotation from Marxism and literature all the time on hegemony as a lived-in process, which is always and constantly reproduced, but in always and constantly being reproduced leaves us a space for ruptures. And I think it's important here to actually conjoin that with Holly's point about comradeship, of which I've recently presented prior to writing up some stuff around a movement.
Yeah, that's definitely not going to get clipped and put on Twitter before this stream is even over.
Left melancholia.
That would never happen.
Left phlegmatism, which is sometimes the struggle has value in itself. And sometimes it's the care and comradeship we share in that struggle, which is as valuable at a micro level as the macro level of creating social change. And Marxists sometimes, and I'm not thinking of any particular journal or magazine, can be quite Stakhanovite in pushing out the project at the expense of the people doing the pushing, with the resulting burnout and depression and so forth and so on. So I think the cultural and aesthetic zone is very important in defining and developing a queer Marxism where we can simultaneously reflect on our own practices, share our practices and knowledge and understandings with others.
Hang on. Torchwood Gal is queen of the chat. That definitely earns a queen of the chat distinction for the night. Guys, just so you know, my rules of the chat are don't be a dick and no whining. But if I dub you king or queen of the chat for the night because you either say something really smart or you make me laugh, like really hard, like it's like really funny, then you get to do whatever you want and I can't ban you. So congratulations, Torchwood Gal, queen of the chat. That's funny. Guys, mount that like button if you thought that was as funny as I did, or even if you didn't. This is Socialism Saturday.
And tie them to a revolutionary project, because it's impossible to be sexually free. It's possible for me to be sexually free unless you're sexually free. And the notion that I can meaningfully be sexually free.
This is legitimately Brave New World.
Is a transient and temporary thing, unless we're all moving in that same direction. So I suppose I wanted to say just a few things in that vein about recognizing the contradictions and not seeing them as weaknesses and being afraid of them, but seeing them as strengths, because it means we constantly revisit the contradiction. We constantly remake. And one of the things I've enjoyed most about my associations with Peter and Holly and Alan in the years has been that constant re-engage, and the views are never quite the same. I mean, I would very much advise anybody here to read anything that these three people have written. But when you begin to read it, you realize they are always evolving, always criticizing, always amending, always moving the agenda forward.
I'm not joking. As soon as we finish this, I'm going to go watch Brave New World. I'm not even joking. Like, I'm thinking like the old school movie, the old school like miniseries that was like made in the 70s, not that new TV show. Not like, but Brave New World is good. If you've never seen it, like the old school like TV, I think you can probably find it on YouTube. There was one that was a remake in like the 90s that was like okay. That one's harder to find though.
Forward and inclusively, so other people can be involved in these conversations as well. I hope that's what we do in historical materialism, and I'm sure that's what's happening elsewhere. But we have had some questions. They're in the YouTube chat for you to read. Gary Kinsman, as always, has been very prolific. Another person that I would advise anyone to read. Talking about comments on the abolitionist approaches that transfer queer Marxism and how does neoliberal queer fit into this. That is about racial class struggles within queer and trans community formations, and the relation of homonormativity and neoliberal queer needs to be more developed. Also, the transformational character of abolitionist revolutionary approaches. There's a lot there to unpack. Who would like to start unpacking it first? Holly.
I'll go. I raised my hand because I couldn't find the.
How is Holly queer?
Button.
I don't understand.
Well, I can start with.
Is she like one of these straight women that are
I think I'm going to
call themselves queer?
With Gary's questions. You know, you've all given me so much to respond to. So I'm just going to kind of go actually in order. Well, I'm just going to get it out of the way. I'm going to get Peter's comments, my response to Peter's comments out of the way first, I think. You know, Peter, I agree with much of what you said, and of course, I don't agree with much of what you said. This is kind of how we roll. You know? I agree in terms of the Marxism can't happen without a labor movement. You know, one of the things that has happened where I've seen
it's
some
true.
Hope,
it's funny because it's true,
hope, if you will. The shooting out. So one of the things that's been happening in you know across the United States has been there have been these right-wing attacks on the energy system, on the electrical.
She is giving that lesbian vibe, isn't she?
The grid, right? You know, so
Mm-hmm.
the far right has been going up into the mountains and blowing up parts of the electrical grid.
What?
In order to shut down drag shows.
What? What the fuck is she talking about? The far right is going up into the mountains to turn off to blow up the electrical grid to stop drag shows? Does anyone know what in God's name this person is talking about? All right, I need to clip this. I'm gonna put this on Twitter and be like, does anyone understand what this person is saying? Because I have no idea what's going on right now. Hang on, I gotta set up my clipping apparatus. What the fuck is that?
Said, and of course, I don't agree with much of what you said. This is kind of how we roll. You know, I agree in terms of the Marxism can't happen without a labor movement. you know, one of the things that has happened where I've seen some hope, and it's such a depressing hope, if you will, the shooting out. So one of the things that's been happening in across the United States has been there have been these right-wing attacks on the energy system, on the electrical what do you call them, the grid, right? So the far right has been going up into the mountains and blowing up parts of the electrical grid in order to shut down drag shows. And it blew out a town, a county in Moore, North Carolina, was shut down. The town, the area was shut down because it blew out the electrical grid. But this happened 6 times in different areas in one week. And it's a really difficult problem to address, because you can just sort of hide. You can't cover the grid. You can't cover the areas. But electricians have been really angry about this. So there's been this upsurging of just electricians who are like, who the fuck are these people? Like all of a sudden, there's just been electricians are like, hey, this is the work that we do. What are you messing with the electrical grid for? Now I got to go out, and just out of nowhere, just kind of, they've been kind of like politicized about, like, who are these people? They just can't, just let these people go out there and do their thing, and don't make us go out there and fix the electrical grid. And it's kind of politically, I'm not going to say radicalized, but solidarized electricians that, and I'm sure that some of them are union electricians as well. And so there's been this interesting point of solidarity on this level of practicality. So
hang on, let me stop my recording. What she just said was actually even more hilarious than it may have first seemed. Because not only did she say that conservatives, who, I'm sorry, conservatives, are the most lazy fucking people in the world. There is no chance in this universe that conservatives are doing this. They are way too lazy for this. So she's saying conservatives are going up into the woods to blow up electrical grids, to stop the drag shows. And because conservatives are going to blow up the electrical grids to stop the drag shows, that means the electricians are rebelling against the conservatives and becoming socialists because they're pissed off that the conservatives are blowing up the electrical grids to end the drag shows. That's the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard in my life. Wow. But they believe this. Oh my god. You know she's in Antifa. You know it. You know, absolutely Antifa right here. Wow. Conservatives blowing up electrical grids to end drag shows wasn't the bingo square I was expecting to cross off tonight, I have to be honest. Let's keep going. We've just peaked for this entire presentation. They can't say something crazier than that. Come on.
As far as the term, homonormativity, I'm just going to say that, yeah, I mean, my position stands. I just call them the gay, queer, and trans people on the right and the far right. And that is how I think of them, just as I
need to make a bingo card, Trendle, you're right.
Other groups who are from marginalized communities who are on the far right and operate as, assimilationists and collaborationists with the far right. I still use the term heteronormativity and cisnormativity when it makes sense. But as far as
Whoopie pie beer.
that you're misunderstanding
We're
my
moving on to
position.
whoopie pie stout.
There's at no point am I saying that there are no queer or trans youth here, or that there's no queer or trans people, or that queer or trans people are not possible under capitalism, or less possible, because you were mentioning that, you know, there's these like young trans kids in Texas. There have always been trans kids in Texas. And the discourse that queer theory and that queer Marxism and that we've all been having, and that we've discussed, that we put out there, really has allowed parents to not to listen to their children when they say, you know, I'm a girl, to not beat them or hide them or shame them, right? You know, so these are the reasons. It's not because the children are necessarily, the 3-year-olds are necessarily taking on a political agenda, but because the parents are now listening more. And you know, ultimately, these are still capitalist formations, right? I mean, we're still living under capital. These are we are queer people still living under capitalism and surviving under capitalism. What I was
It's so hard on
in
you.
terms of a
How do you make it every single day surviving under capitalism as
more along the
queer?
lines of what Paul was talking about, right?
Which basically means you're a
world
lesbian.
where we can have pleasure in the afternoon and a work schedule that's organized around that, where you know, queer kids don't have to worry about fighting to be who they are, where they can just be who they are and self-develop. So that's more along the lines of really kind of what I was talking about there. And we don't really know, you know, I don't know, you know, as a person who is non-binary, who's a she, they, as a person who is, you know,
oh, she's non-binary. Oh,
you know,
that explains it. That's why I told you, they're all fucking non-binary now. When they say she, they, he, they, when they use the they pronoun, it is a rejection of the gender binary, because they're very literally trying to abolish gender entirely. That's why she's freaking queer. She's non-binary.
Has been with a trans person who, you know, we live in a small town. When we first moved here, we did not know if people in this town, and still do not know, if people view us as lesbians, if people view us as a straight couple. We did not know if
they view you as lesbians.
Outside. We were afraid to walk outside. And here's the thing.
Then why didn't you move?
This sometimes gets twisted. Just because we are endangered doesn't mean that we are dangerous. Just because we are imperiled is not necessarily I think that this gets romanticized sometimes. It's not necessarily a sign that we are winning, right? And it's not necessarily a sign that we are that you mentioned that Bolsonaro is aware of Judith Butler. I mean, it's good. It's a sign that we're on their radar, but we actually also have to build power behind that. We actually also have to still win. And if we can't, then we're just stuck with the specter of watching one another lose, right? And not knowing how to intervene. And so
it's like the libertarians. You'll get used to it.
We can't just,
it's okay to lose.
Be, you know, it's not enough. And so I think that being in danger does not being the same thing as being dangerous. And so I'm thinking in terms of, you know, when Roe v. Wade fell, I posted some images of this 2013 protest in Texas that happened, where we had tens of thousands of people, where we were fighting, where we got into fights with police, and we lost. Obviously, we lost. Roe v. Wade is overturned. Things are horrible here. And people were like, where is this fight? And there were people that were bloody from battles with police. And people were really excited about this. And I had to take the pictures down. I'm like, we lost, guys. This wasn't a good day. This was a bad day. But there was this assumption that we were dangerous because we were fighting, right? And we have to do better. We have to fight and win, not just fight and lose. We have to fight and win. So, I mean, that's one of the things that
Hang on, I got a super chat coming in from Tom J. Tom J, thank you. I appreciate it. I tried to send 2 super chats about her, but YouTube wouldn't let me. Fuck YouTube. It included sounds like Ban Ita shrugs and Dar left. I don't know what it. Hang on. Bantifa. Oh, Bantifa. Okay, Bantifa. I got that one. Shrugs. I don't know what that means. And far left something. Interesting if this gets through. What type in normal what you said, Tom J. Type it in normal, not super chat. Antifa. I don't know what this is. Sucks. Dar left ding. What does dar left ding mean? Drugs. Oh, thank you. Drugs. Okay. And far left. What is ding? The left wing. Why were they censoring that? That's so weird. All right. Well, thank you for the super chat anyway, Tom J. I appreciate it.
I want to put out there.
See, you guys are so much smarter than me.
About
so much
youth
smarter
as well. And so
it's probably the beer.
I've noticed, and I didn't first know how to situate it until I started thinking about this talk. There's this obsession with queer youth these days. And in part in Texas, there's a real reason for that, and that's because queer youth are under attack. But also, when you start talking about queer issues, people are like, we got to do something about the queer youth. We got to help the queer youth. We got to help the queer youth. And there's other people that need help as well, other than the queer youth. And there's something super symptomatic about that. And part of that is because just like with, fetuses and abortion, there's this love of this concept of a being that hasn't existed yet because it's pure. There's something about like this
woman's been talking for like 87 minutes.
And the queer youth is that
there was one question. She's answering
sex.
questions that wasn't even asked.
They're the very easy to love queer, like cute queer people, as opposed to the old queer people who've been going around having sex, or as opposed to like queer sex workers, right? That are much harder to take up the case for in Texas than queer babies that are still, very innocent, right? We're not innocent. And so, there's this idea also that we should be okay. And this came with that whole liberal, it gets better. There's an individualization of the problem where with this.
She never even answered this guy's question. She went off on her own tangent.
Of family values as well, right? Why is there a problem? Because you're in the wrong family. Once you get out of your family, you're going to be okay.
Oh no! Oh
there's
no!
No systemic problem.
Oh no!
It's just there's no problem. You're not going to hit a problem once you hit the labor market.
What'd she just do? Was that an attack on the family? I think it was.
You're not going to hit a problem. It's just once you get out of that horrible
it's the
family
whole system.
That you had. If you were in a family like my family, you'd be fine because I'm a great parent, right? If I could only I could be your parent, right? So there's this problem. Oh, the queer youth, right? It's going to be fine once you get out. And so once you say things like, I was at a meeting at my university. I'm in a queer group for faculty and staff, and
she works at a university.
There's real violence that's happening. Somebody that was
university,
was a dean,
probably a faculty member,
was beaten up on his way to work. And people wanted to, some of the other administrators who were straight, they wanted to talk about the queer youth. They didn't want to talk about the full-grown person who was attacked, because there's no it gets better for that. So there's something really,
this person is
something
insane,
really symptomatic about that. And so there's I wanted to also, before getting into this, the question of the neoliberal queer,
She literally just got around to the question.
and
Holy shit.
and some of Gary's questions. I wanted to bring up Paul's question of, and this, I think that this touches on some of the things that Alan has raised as well.
She just said so much and yet nothing at all.
The subjective and the and the objective. And I really liked what both of y'all said about talking both holistically about and in an integrative way about totalities. And I completely agree with this. Whenever I say totality, I don't mean in any way at all some kind of platonic totality that is static and unchanging, but certainly more of an unfolding one. But interestingly, there's a new work that just came out on it's a reader by Christian Lotz on Marxist phenomenology. And there seems to be, and I'm doing work now, my next book is going to be a book on Marxist phenomenology. And also, by the way, I am, because you might be really surprised by this, but the state of Texas didn't hire me to do work on queer Marxism. They hired me to do work on philosophy of technology. So a lot of the work that I'm doing.
She works for the state of Texas. The state of Texas employs this person. Let's just all take a minute with that. Which means she probably works at a state taxpayer-funded institution in Texas. Like, perhaps, the University of Texas, Texas State University. What's her position? Is she a faculty member or staff? She teaching classes? Texas fucking employs this person! Let that be a lesson to you, Texas. This person would not get a job at a state university in New Hampshire. I'll tell you that right now. Wow. Assistant professor, faculty at Texas State University. Holy shit. I mean, it's like totally predictable, and yet I'm really genuinely shocked by it. I'm genuinely surprised.
Is on technology and AI, which is what I was originally trained to do, was work on philosophy and technology. So I'm doing work on technology, including technology and gender, and
technology
and
in general, and gender and Marxism.
But so there is this way of, and this is even in my book, this attempt
looking
to
on the bright side, it's always
the
Rachel.
Subjective and the objective.
She's like, well, at least it's not California.
To try to work that out.
Wow.
And I think that maybe because of being under COVID protocols, there was this, how do we reach out to other people, brought up this question of the subjective being shut down and needing to reach out, brought in the question of subjectivity. So as to the question of race is always a question of queer Marxism, and it's always a question in international Marxism, because we can't just talk about race as an American, I can't just understand race in American terms. I have to learn to understand race in Canadian terms, and I actually have to understand race in historical terms and understand the history of the world in terms of European colonization. So I mean, you know, this is a part of understanding queer Marxism in general. But I mean, one of my students are largely Latinx. I work at what's called a Hispanic serving university, and I teach, you know, Marxist students who are well, I mean, I teach all students, but I
Say it.
you know, I don't know.
Say it.
I'm really glad. I'm really lucky in my job that I get to teach students who are working and who are Latinx, and we get to do work on.
She's saying that all of her students are Marxists because they all have jobs. All of her students are little communists. Wow. Well done, Texas. Excellent job. You guys want to know why I think Texas is going to go blue at some point? It's this right here. Ben, people like that are being hired in Australian universities too. It's not just a thing that's happening in the United States of America, and CRT is being taught here too. That's very, very true. This stuff is happening all over the world. Definitely not just in the United States. I appreciate the super chat, Ben. No, Jan, you're lying. No. Oh my God.
Queer stuff and
Don't tell Brian, he'll say it wasn't a furry.
And read Capital at the same time, kind of like on the side. So that is all really exciting stuff. I want to talk about a really interesting conversation that I had with some people about the word neoliberal. Apparently, some Gen X Marxists are really unhappy with the term because they're using it like liberal, indistinguishable from the word liberal in the American political sense of liberal and conservative. And so I had an interaction where I'm like, that's not what the word means. And they're like, yeah, we know that. But when we're organizing, no one understands it in the classical liberal term. And it's to the point where it's, and it's used so much in terms of neoliberal and homonormativity, not homonormativity, but gayness, that it's being understood it's being interpreted as conservative by like conservative Marxists as an anti-gay
conservative term. Marxists.
So they're like, we just don't use the term neoliberal anymore at all. And so there were all these questions that were brought up by the term neoliberal in general. And they were trying to just not use the word and maybe be more descriptive of the way that capitalism is operating now. And I thought that was just really, really interesting, because I was, you know, fighting for the term to be used and finding it still useful. But and I mean, I was wondering if that was even encountered. So that's my response to neoliberal, is that I'm finding young Marxists not even using it at all in terms of organizing. So these days I'm just saying capitalism when I talk to people.
Peter.
Oh God, she finally stopped talking. Thank God.
Thanks.
I'd forgotten there were other people there.
This conversation is really wide-ranging, which is hard. So I just want to focus on a couple of things I feel absolutely compelled.
There are still those gays, Barb. They haven't abandoned us.
Keep quiet and leave other people to respond and let the conversation happen. But I did want to pick up on Gary Kinsman's questions, which I thought were really important, about abolitionism and where abolitionism comes in. Of course, when you talk about abolitionism, you're talking about
Good night,
Black
Queen
Lives
of the
Matter,
chat. We'll see you next time.
You're talking about abolishing police, abolishing prisons. That was the starting point relating to the more longer term history of abolishing slavery, abolishing racism, abolishing Jim Crow. What's been really exciting to me, and this was another of the major challenges I didn't mention in my initial remarks, is how abolitionism has expanded to cover some queer issues. So just as Black Lives Matter expanded to spark mass mobilizations that Black trans lives matter, Black queer lives matter, abolitionism also expanded to be abolitionism about the family. Abolish the family.
There it is.
And
Told you.
That's been really exciting. I think at the same time, abolitionism has had a real utopian dimension in a good and in a not
Abolishing
so good
the family
sense.
is really exciting.
Because I think
he did say it out loud.
You have to abolish capitalism.
Okay, I gotta clip this. I'm sorry. I gotta clip it. I gotta go back to the family shit. Hang on. Okay, hang on. Sorry, guys. I need to do it. It's gonna save me time later. I appreciate you sitting through it, and you get to hear it again.
Up on Gary Kinsman's questions, which I thought were really important about abolitionism and where abolitionism comes in. Of course, when you talk about abolitionism, you're talking about Black Lives Matter, and you're talking about abolishing police, abolishing prisons. That was the starting point relating to the more longer term history of abolishing slavery, abolishing racism, abolishing Jim Crow. What's been really exciting to me, and this was another of the major challenges I didn't mention in my initial remarks, is how abolitionism has expanded to cover some queer issues. So just as Black Lives Matter expanded to spark mass mobilizations that Black trans lives matter, Black queer lives matter, abolitionism also expanded to be abolitionism about the family. Abolish the family. And I think that's been really exciting. I think at the same time, abolitionism has had a real utopian dimension in a good and in a not so good sense. Because I think to abolish racism, you have to abolish capitalism. To abolish the family, you have to abolish capitalist social reproduction. So it's a demand that looks beyond the world, the system we're living in. And the problem is, the relationship of forces is not such that we're on the verge of abolishing capitalism tomorrow. So
okay. I want to make a point that Bot said, and Bot, good catch, Bot. He said that abolishing capitalism will abolish racism. Whiteness is capitalism. For those who don't know, you might be new to me. Whiteness does not mean the color of your skin. Whiteness means capitalism. Every time they say whiteness, they're not really talking about your skin color. They might make you think that to create divisions. What they're really talking about is capitalism. All right, got my clip. Let's keep going.
So in looking at the evolution of Black Lives Matter and its exciting implications for queers, I think we need to see that there's a bifurcation there where, some of the key queer leaders of Black Lives Matter have turned to electoral justice.
Electoral justice, what does that mean?
Is not fundamentally revolutionary. And there's a risk of losing that radical utopian thrust that says, okay, we got to get rid of all of this. So I really feel with Holly's sense of being endangered is not the same as being dangerous. Hang
on. So Ben says this is a class war, not a race war, while Marxists view everything as a class war. Everything. But what I would say is this is not a war of left versus right. It's not a war of white versus black. It's not a war of gay versus straight or man versus woman or any of those things. It's authoritarianism versus libertarianism. That's what the real war is, so far as I'm concerned.
Suffered some really big defeats. We're in a horrible situation in lots of ways. I mean, I particularly understand that in rural Texas, but it's true everywhere. We're in a horrible situation in lots of ways, in lots of places. And yet at the same time, I don't think the mobilizations have been in vain. The world is different because Black Lives Matter happened. You know, in my workplace, which has a weak union and lots of people who are conformist in lots of ways, they're just in the last couple of weeks in the Netherlands, we've been in the headlines because a report came out about racism at my workplace. And it wouldn't have happened without Black Lives Matter in the United States. Here in the Netherlands, people are talking about racism and saying, oh, it's appalling. We didn't know. Well, of course, you had to know, idiots. But people are seeing it and saying, oh, something's got to be done. And it wouldn't have happened without those mobilizations. So, yes, things are horrible.
These people really believe that the only people who are not racist in the world are Marxist. If you are not, this is why they said like Robin DiAngelo was like, all white people are racist, right? I didn't realize this at the time. It's not because they're white. It's because they're not Marxist.
We suffered lots of defeats, but we've gained some ground too.
My understanding of this has evolved in the past year and a half.
I think we need to build on that somehow. And we need to build on that in a way that allows us to strategize about changing the world. And here, again, I have some mixed feelings about what Paul said about queer and Marxism. Yes, there's something subjective about queer. There's something objective about Marxism. But as Alan said, we need to try to integrate it. We need to try to put it together into something cohesive. And as Holly was indicating, talk about totality, not in a platonic way, but in a real way. And that means putting it together into something that enables us to change the world. Because I think queer Marxism has to be about changing the world. Yes, queer also has to be about having sex in the afternoon. Whenever Paul raises this, I think about
why can't we have sex in the afternoon?
Everyday life.
Oh, because we have jobs.
And I'm totally for it. It's central to my worldview.
Having sex in the afternoon is central to your worldview.
To my worldview too. So I want to put it together into one cohesive package as much as possible to say, okay, how can we queer people be part of a mobilization against racism, a mobilization to defend embattled,
not the same Peter Drucker, different Drucker,
and ourselves.
I think.
And let's build a movement that can change the world. How do we do that? I think that's a question we always have to keep front and center. Those were the most burning things I was wanting to say.
Okay.
That
Alan.
Peter Drucker's dead, I think.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
I'll just say a couple things and then welcome other people coming back in different ways. First of all, I really appreciated the way that Paul, talking about contradictions, raised basically the challenge of the dynamism of queer Marxism, which is also the challenge of Marxism in general, but certainly the challenge of queer Marxism, is that there's a certain comfort in finding stable formulations that seem to provide us with a compass for making it through this complex and dynamic world.
Indeed, radical moderate.
And that therefore there's sometimes a tendency to try to hold on to the current compass formation rather than understanding that the compass itself needs to constantly be changing as the terrain does.
Isn't it ironic?
Certain things about the compass that need to
Don't
be
you think? A little too
stand
ironic.
over time, and that's a complex balance that we're grappling with in terms of queer Marxism. It, I think, is part of the reason that I love the fact that both Holly and Peter have had a chance to go back with books that they've written to reintroduce them, and the way that there's serious rethinking going on both of their cases is both a tribute to them as thinkers, but it's also a recognition of the fact that the world has changed since I wrote that in ways that have made me rethink what I thought I knew. And that is something that we're all doing all the time. And I actually believe, and this may be just because I'm too talkative sometimes and I'm very social, but I also believe that the conversation is one of the key ways that we do that. That for myself as an activist, over time, the conversations with fellow activists within Marxist organizations, outside, in all kinds of ways, conversations like this, to me, we actually nurture each other, we challenge each other, we learn from each other, we rethink, and so on, and that's crucial. Peter said a lot of what I want to say about abolitionism, and I really appreciate that. And I also, in my thinking, certainly abolitionism certainly acquired a new centrality as a result of Black Lives Matter, drawing on work that had been done over a long period of time, with the idea that police and prisons, you can't improve, the problems are not superficial, and the idea that there's a violent process of racial formation, but also class, settler, colonial, gender, and sexual formation built into those institutions that are not accidents that can be improved by improving this or that theory, this and that policy. It's not just prisons and police, it's also schools, it's also social services, and as Peter said, it's also the family. And so in many ways, abolitionism is an exciting and enriching revolutionary frame that adds a lot to our understanding of queer Marxism in ways that I think Peter really nicely talked about. I think, as Peter's saying, with abolitionism, as with any other revolutionary formulation, you're stuck with the challenge of the strategic and the transitional. It's that we can't only say abolish, we need to think about what it means in the here and now in terms of the struggles we wage and how we organize those struggles effectively, but also the transformation to, because abolishing without rebuilding is obviously, abolishing the family raises the question, well, so what sorts of social relations will nurture us? And that can't be answered simply at the level, as Holly was saying, and others, simply at the level of an individual. For sure, people can work out social formations to sustain themselves that are counter-systemic and that work in some ways, but also the idea of actually beginning to develop from below the new formations and changing the world so that those get nurtured by the way the world is actually organized is a lot of the question. And so I think I really support what Peter was saying about abolitionism, and I think it's incredibly exciting, and it raises, as do all revolutionary approaches, key strategic and transitional questions that are difficult. And as Peter said, that balance between the utopian, we need that vision of what we're fighting for, what we aspire for, and then the difficult question of from below. And that leaves the last thing that I'm going to just say for now is that I guess one of the things that I'm seeing as a theme through this discussion is this whole question of movements, absence of them at times, sensitive isolation, feelings that the world is difficult to handle right now, but that's a lot because we don't necessarily have the sense. There's certainly really incredibly important movements that are making very real changes in the here and now. And Peter, I really appreciate you saying that because, it's certainly not true that we're simply being acted on. We are also acting on the world collectively in all kinds of different ways that are incredibly important. And I think one of the things that's really important in terms of what Paul was saying that I took from it is one of the key things about movements is the way that we transform ourselves as activists through movements. As
ding, 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 ding. Yes, they do.
Engaging together and changing
exactly.
the world, learning from it and
well
so
done,
on.
Ben.
I do think that raises interesting questions in broader terms about the eroticism of movements that I think, again, is something that we haven't talked enough about, which is not simply to say sex within movements. That's a very specific issue that has really
You will own
charged,
nothing,
and
and you will
so,
be happy.
Elements because of the way that movements often have power relations that mean that sex within movements can actually be captured by
Look
those
at
power
Holly.
relations.
Holly looks
But the
extremely
idea
interested.
of eroticism and comradeship, and in the erotic elements of comradeship, are
The
things that,
erotic
again,
elements
I
of
think, as queer
comradeship.
Marxists, we've perhaps held back from. We've tried to be kind of instrumental and brain forward in certain ways, and not talked about the complexities of what it means to build around care, love, things like that, which doesn't mean that you like comrades necessarily. And yet this idea that you build a particular kind of relationship through trying to change the world together, through engaging, through listening, and so on, and that queerness adds really important dimensions, and I think challenges some of the instrumental rational idea of movements that's often there, certainly in Marxist theorizing, but also in social movements theorizing more generally. So yeah, over to the
Holly's very excited. She's jumping in.
Okay, there's a couple of things I'd like to say, but I know that Holly is bursting to address the eclecticism question.
Exactly.
So I'm going to let her do
Bursting
that before I come back.
indeed.
Yeah, I just want to just to address if there's a question about Petrus Liu's idea of eclecticism. I think it's a really simple answer, actually. That's, I mean, you know, maybe bad on me for giving a simple answer, but I feel that queer Marxists are often asked this, well, what about the dangers of eclecticism question, maybe more so than other people bringing up Marxism and ... whatever issue. And if you, I mean, let me pose it a different way. If queerness can't be addressed by Marxism, then aren't you asking us or demanding us to be eclectic, right? If we can't address it through Marxism, then you're asking us to go address it from something else. So
it's true.
If I can't address sexuality, if I can't address gender through Marx, then I'm forced to address it through another framework, right? And then I have to go, if I can't address ecology through Marx, then I have to go address ecology through a different framework. If I can't address, race through Marx, then I have to go through a different framework. So this idea that we can't address things through Marx pushes us into eclectic frameworks. So we're really in this, so we're put in this kind of, damned if you do, damned if you don't position. I think that there is this kind of trivialization of queer life that brings up this question for us a lot of the time. And I think that this has something to do, I don't know, perhaps with, I don't know, feminization. I don't know what it is, but there's this idea that we're eclectic, we're not we're not this core. I don't know. I thought it was going to be simple, but maybe it's not. Maybe I need to think about it more. But I think that the ultimate line is that we get accused of eclecticism, but ultimately we are, if we don't answer the questions of queer sexuality and queer gender through Marx, then that is when we're being asked to bring in eclectic frameworks. So we can't really have it both ways. If not,
they think that queer sexuality and gender can only be answered through Marx. That doesn't make any sense.
If I can just follow
Did Marx invent queer?
It seems to me,
is that the argument that's being
Bruno
made?
Poses a question, but it seems to me that it's a misrepresentation to say eclecticism. What we are saying is that a coherent and critical social analysis is always totalizing. It's
Hang on, I got to take this super chat from Radical Moderate. Would someone tell them that Marx is a dead straight white guy? Well, you know what they would say, Radical Moderate? They'd probably call him queer for some reason, because you can be anything and be queer. It doesn't even matter. And remember, this is not about being straight, white, man, cis, whatever. It's only about creating conflict to destabilize the system, to gain power so they can attack capitalism. Has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It is only and forever about destabilizing the system so they can usher in Marxism.
Always trying to construct a totality while recognizing contradiction and plurality. Now, we can play the bourgeois game, which is to give every phenomena its abstracted name.
They're the proletariat.
Differently, and therefore play division. We can actually say, well, queer remarks, race remarks, gender remarks, there are tensions. And of course, at different historical conjunctures and contexts, there have been tensions. But that form of abstraction is a bourgeois analysis. And if we go to Sol who I'm currently using quite a bit, a real abstraction is to bring it back to the concrete. And the concrete is people's lives are multifaceted. If we can't engage with them in that way, then we are in real trouble. In that respect, then, I don't think, and this is to reassure Peter, I'm absolutely clear that when I talk about the tensions between queer and Marxism, I am representing the dialectic and the contradiction. We can still strategize. And in a way, living in that contradiction, recognizing it, rejoining it while recognizing we have to have concrete strategic movements forward and tactical developments to actually combat capitalism, it's more likely to be a democratic than a singular notion if we keep those contradictions in mind. They're what make us move forward.
Oh, it'll be democratic socialism. It'll be great.
Ideas so fresh and constantly renewed. I do think as well,
as long as it's democratic.
Stuff, I enjoyed that discussion. It reminded me of Liz Wilson's essay in the Activating Theory.
And this is where Bernie and AOC become the intermediary between where we are now and where these people want to be. Because they're like, it'll be democratic. It'll be democratic socialism. Sin says, every time you call these bougie academics proletariat, I laugh too hard. Well, they think they are proletariat. They don't see themselves as part of the bourgeois. By the way, bourgeoisie is synonymous with whiteness because it's also synonymous with capitalism. All right, guys, we got about 14 more minutes. Please mount that like button if you've enjoyed this Socialism Saturday. Let's wrap up.
Collection in the 1990s, where she said, what some radicals have got to be careful about is the transgressing everything, because in the end you wake up one morning being a conservative who wants to actually have abstinence only, and you're radical because nobody else is that. And I worry about that a little bit.
That's why conservatives need to drop the social issues.
I think it's very important.
If conservatives do not drop the social issues and just focus on the fucking economic issues, they are playing right into these people's hands. These people want conservatives focused on abortion, focused on gay marriage, focused on legislating their religion. These people would like nothing better than for conservatives to only focus on social issues, focus on drag queens, focus on books and libraries, focus on whatever, focus on, I don't even know. But that's where these people want them to focus. Social issues. Conservatives can buck what these people want if they focus on lowering taxes, ending the Fed, abolishing the FBI, abolishing the Department of Education. Tech censorship. If conservatives could just pull their heads out of their asses and focus on anything that wasn't social conservatism, like their issue, they're like in terms of morals and values and all that bullshit, They could actually win. They won't do that. They don't know how to do that, but they really, really should do that. It'd be great. Oh God, the banning porn. Oh my fucking God. Could they be any more stupid? If your biggest priority right now is banning porn, that's going to be a problem. You're not going to win that. You're not going to win that. You are not going to win that. You want to know why? Because by fighting that fight, you're playing right into these people's hands. Focus on abolishing the Department of Education. If you want to stop the transing of the kids, then focus on abolishing the Department of Education. Focus on separating government from education. You're not going to win this. In fact, the more you fight this, the more you're going to lose. But what do I know? I'm probably just making all this up. No, he doesn't. Well, anime is like a gateway to the transing of the kids, so I can kind of understand his logic, but he's going to fucking lose. He's going to lose. He's going to look ridiculous. He's going to make the rest of us look ridiculous. Conservatives universally make the worst possible decision at every single decision-making point. It really is like they want to be perpetual losers. If they wanted to win, they'd focus on abolishing the Department of Education. That is the only winning strategy they have.
That we actually recognize that personal political connection. It's been mentioned a couple of times, my why can't we fuck during the afternoon, and I am serious about that. Part of my work is also in something called sexual literacy, which talks about how we can enable on an everyday basis people's lifelong sexual learning and understanding and development, because our bodies change, our societies change, and that literacy, the metaphor perhaps, is important. But one of the reasons I do that is to constantly say, if we are neglecting the personal, the political becomes barren. And if we...
This is the perfect place to start if you want more kids to turn trans. If you want to lose spectacularly, go ahead, focus on that. If you want more kids to be trans, not less, focus on that. If you want more kids to be non-binary, not less, focus on that. You're going to lose. There is no win. There is no way you can win this. It is impossible. The only way you win is to abolish the Department of Education and separate schools from government. That is the only avenue you have that you can be successful. Everything else you do around this is going to make the problem worse. So you're not starting anywhere. This is what people need to understand. You're not starting anywhere. You're choosing the avenue that is going to make the problem that you claim to care about worse. You're going to create more trans kids, not less trans kids. It's like with abortion. How you guys fight abortion, you create more abortion, not less abortion. You save 0 babies. No babies have ever been saved in the history of the pro-life movement. You've actually created more abortion, and it's going to be the same with this. If you actually cared about kids, you would fight to abolish the Department of Education.
We are neglecting the political, the personal becomes fetishistic. They need to be joined. Yet another dialectic, yet another contradiction. So the next time you decide to not go in for your job and spend the afternoon in bed with your or on the kitchen table or on the couch with your partner or several partners or fuck buddies, it's a political act.
What?
And indeed, if you're part of a political organization,
Afternoon delight is a political act? What are you talking about?
Are there any other contributions any of the speakers would like to make at this point? We are getting close to, well, we've still got some time left.
None,
Does
0.
anybody want to pick anything
No
up?
involvement.
From Gary's questions or from what we've said to each other? Incidentally, a quick plug. I too have been blessed by Alan's manuscript, not yet complete and published. I'm very sure it will be out in time for you to buy it for next Christmas, for Presents for All Revolutionaries. It's a beautiful piece of writing. And that reinforces Holly's book, beautiful, clear impact. Peter's book I've described in a review as magisterial. Alan's book provides.
What you're suggesting is not going to result in any fewer kids being mutilated. It's going to result in more kids being mutilated because you're not fighting the problem. You're making shit up because you don't understand the problem that you're fighting. This is the problem with conservatives. This is why conservatives fuck everything up. They don't understand the problem they're fighting, and then they fight it in a way that is not going to fix the problem they claim to care about. There we go. And so it doesn't work and it backfires. You're not again, the way conservatives are fighting the transing of the kids is only resulting in more trans kids. Name me one battle conservatives have won. Honestly, we're going to sit here for a second. Well, it's not a bipartisan thing. You can wish upon a star and hope that's going to come true, but it's not going to come true. Name me. We're going to sit here for a second. I want to hear one person make the argument that conservatives are winning the battle on transing of the kids. Make one argument that makes me believe that conservatives are being effective at all in this battle. Because they're screaming a lot and they're shouting a lot. And every once in a while they get a book banned from a library. And then that book gets replaced a week later with 3 other books because conservatives aren't looking because they already feel like they've won. Name me one thing give me any piece of evidence at all that anything that the right has done has resulted in less trans kids. That is not evidence. Saying they're detransitioners speaking up. Those kids are already mutilated. Congratulations. So what? There are some schools in which 20, 30, 40% of kids are identifying as gender nonconforming. You get one detransitioner, you get 150 more trans kids. Probably even more than that, to be honest. You get one detransitioner, 1,000 more trans kids. Congratulations, you're really winning there. Give me one piece of evidence that anything conservatives have done have actually resulted in a win. Well, yeah, I mean, I will say this. This is a win. The number of kids being homeschooled has increased. That's a win. Has nothing to do with the transing of the kids. I don't care about the UK. No offense, UK. But that's not the UK is not the outcome of American conservatives. You cannot credit American conservatives with closing Tavistock. That's not correct. So no one in the chat can point me to any evidence at all that conservatives have been effective in preventing the transing of the kids. Do I have that right? Well, no, you have no evidence is the thing. It's not your phone that's the problem. The problem is you don't have evidence. Again, you can wish upon a star. You can make things up, radical moderate. We'll see what you have to say later, I guess, but I don't think you've prevented any transing at all.
Provocative, interesting, but all of them are books that you pick it up and you find yourself several hours later still reading it, realizing you've neglected everything else. Have we any other questions, my friends? or any other contributions? Oh, I have a question. And it's from
Nothing
Terry
would-
Conroy.
I want to say this, and then I promise we'll wrap up. Nothing would make me happier than if conservatives could actually find it within them to do something effective, but they don't listen. Universally, they don't fucking listen. It's like they come late to the party, they don't pay attention to what the actual problem is, they don't think of strategies that are going to solve the actual problem, they just go on surface level, like, lunacy. It's like, genderqueer in the library, that'll do it, genderqueer, if we just get genderqueer out of the library, that'll fix everything. No, it won't. That's not where the problem is. Genderqueer is just a symptom of the problem. It is not the problem itself, it's just a symptom of the problem. So you solve for one symptom of the problem, and then you go, oh, God, we did it. We got genderqueer out of the library, and you high five and you pat yourselves on the back. And then next week, the librarian replaces genderqueer with 5 more genderqueer books that aren't titled genderqueer. They're titled something differently, but they say basically the same thing. And that wasn't really the problem anyway, because the problem is what's going on in the classrooms and the GSAs. And now guess what? Now because you banned genderqueer from the library, the kids want to read genderqueer even more. I saw a school where parents were trying to get books banned from the library. And not only did they not get the books banned from the library actually put an explicit content warning on the book. Which, guess what that's going to do? The explicit content warning on the book is going to make the book more fucking appealing than it was in the first place. There were probably no kids who even wanted to read that book. And then all of a sudden, parents try to get the book banned, and the library slaps an explicit content warning on it. And then all of a sudden, everyone was like, ooh, what's in that book? Why is everyone so interested in that book? It's like everything conservatives do have the opposite effect because they don't fucking listen.
Who incidentally in the YouTube said how much he missed the queer Marxism material at this year's HM. There were a couple of sexuality panels, but obviously it was a little bit smaller than usual. So Terry's comment, how do we maintain dialogue and comradeship in these challenging times to have more exchange as terrains shift and build boats that can, we're back to ships again, that can allow us all to grow and also create space for new people? Beautiful question. Comrades.
Holly looks positively smitten right now.
Did Peter want to go? Was that a hand up or?
I thought it was.
Well, no, but I would say we nurture our relationships by having discussions like this, which I feel has been it went all over the place at certain points, but I also feel like I listened, like other people listened to me, like, and I end up in the peculiar position of agreeing with everything anybody has said for the last 15, 20 minutes. So I feel like we got somewhere. I concur with the people who said what a shame it was to miss historical materialism this last November. I really missed the contact and the stimulation and the learning. So, you know, the hell with this pandemic, which has really been terrible for me in lots of ways. But I think I feel like we can find ways to overcome it, and I really want to thank Paul at a certain point when I said how terrible I felt about historical materialism happening live again, and I really felt terrible that I felt I couldn't be there. And I feel great that Paul took the initiative to make this HM broadcast happen. which really has given me a sense of connection and moving forward that I really missed. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I felt really terrible about not being able to, fly overnight to London from Texas, and I just felt that I would instantly get sick. I would get sick all the time, flying over to London every year, and I just knew that there was just no way that could happen without coming back ill. So I felt that it just didn't seem possible, and that's why I feel that we do need to forge new ways to find one another. And I haven't figured out how that's going to work yet. But I do know that when we do meet each other and when we do find one another, and maybe we'll go back to stable, different pre-social media internet forms like email, and right. But when we do, I think that not interacting in the 20th century modalities of immediately attacking one another for ideological differences, particularly with young people who may have learned something online that they might not even be necessarily beholden to, just might be an idea they picked up online, but really just kind of being gracious with people. Even if they are, this is something I'm trying to practice, right? Even if if they're not being gracious towards me, trying to be gracious and understand where they're coming from, because we are under such a wild amount of stress now, that when people come at me from, a strange direction or an antagonistic direction, and I don't know the person, but I think that they might be a possible comrade, to kind of see the comrade in them.
You can see the comrade in them. I can see the comrade in all of you.
And remind myself of that, to keep and create space for them, but to have patience with folks, and to kind of have that just revolutionary patience, right? And to think in those terms. And one of the things about being in rural Texas is that I have to have a lot of patience for people who are not anywhere near comrades, right? They might be people, in the town that I'm living in, there's no Democratic Party even. There's just multiple sides of the Republican Party. So I have to
Little does she know that all Republicans hate each other.
All kinds of patience for people, all kinds of patience for neighbors. For instance, if you celebrate Halloween, it means that you may not harm me, right? You're not just somebody celebrating the Harvest Festival.
What? What does that mean?
There's all kinds of patience I've learned to have for people. So why wouldn't I have patience for somebody who is a comrade, right? Or who wishes to be, but might have just a little bit of a different ideological line. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm learning how to do, instead of the kind of the narcissism of small differences, as Freud says. But to also learn.
Oh, of course, she's a Freudian. They're all fucking Freudians. All of them.
To ask people how they're doing. To really try.
Conservatives
to see
hate young
human beings, and to not instrumentalize one
but
another.
Marxists love Freud.
That is how I'm going to, how I've been working to create space at a distance, and hopefully when creating space locally becomes possible, create space locally as well. So,
Alan, would you like to add any comment?
Yeah, just briefly, because I do think time is running up, but I really appreciate the last kind of round of discussions. I really missed historical materialism in London this year. I was sad I had to cancel because of a family health issue. But I find that it's important to think about, for me, I missed certainly the sessions, but I also missed the conversations between sessions. And it's a reminder, in answer to what Terry was raising, that we need formal and informal ways of rebuilding our networks and so on. I've learned so much over time from not only the formal presentations of people, but the informal conversations afterwards with people with very different experiences, hearing the stories and so on, being helped along by mentors, but also challenged by people who are newer to the politics and to the ways of thinking and so on. And I just think that that a lot of it is, I mean, I like the way that Holly described it as patience. Part of the way that we have that patience is by also building the human relations and the relations of care that are complex, that can even cross differences at times and so on. And I was really excited by the idea of a roundtable. I fear that too often in situations like this, we end up talking past one another. We each make our, this is my turn now. Thank you. Here's my presentation. Thank you. Please ask me questions about me. Thank you. And I think the idea that actually we learn much more by engaging with each other in all kinds of ways. And in terms of Holly's focus on philosophy of technology, I think it's great to be doing it in this way as a broadcast, but I also miss the embodied co-presence that adds an extra dimension. And again, eroticism in the broader sense, but certainly that then, and so here to our embodied co-presence in the near future.
Okay, thanks a lot. We'll draw it to a close now. Thank you to my three stellar speakers. It was every expectation that this was going to be both a panel where there were comradely disagreements, but a great deal of
comradely
sharing and
disagreements,
generosity to each other. Also, thank you to those of you who joined us this afternoon. There will be HM Broad.
All right. Well, I guess that's it, guys. Congratulations. You made it through another Socialism Saturday. I told you this was going to be one for the books, and it certainly did not disappoint. I feel like they hit on every Marxism topic that we were like, that we've covered so far on Socialism Saturday. They hit on abolishing the family. They hit on every element of capitalism. They hit on abolishing prisons. They hit on like abolition of everything. Apparently, they completely brought together my theory about the four truths: gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. It was a good week. Anyway, guys, tomorrow we're doing movie night in the supporter Discord at 8 p.m. We're watching Die Hard. I've never seen it. I will be watching it tomorrow with my community, and I will be sending out a link to join the Discord to members of my YouTube channel, to my Patreon, and to my locals. If you want to join, activelyunwoke.com/support. The link is in the description below. I'm going to go take my rest for the rest of the night, guys. Take care. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.